Daenerys Targaryen stood under the scorching sun of Astapor, the red bricks of the city walls radiating unbearable heat. Her long silver hair clung to her neck. Her arms, bare beneath light linen, felt the stifling press of the air. Before her, rank upon rank of Unsullied stood silent, motionless, each man a statue of perfect discipline. The slaver Krasny's Emonaklas droned on in High Valyrian, sparing vicious remarks about her in his mother tongue that he assumed she did not understand. And behind Daenerys, the small retinue that remained loyal to her, Ser Jorah Mormont, her Dothraki blood riders, and a few others who had pledged themselves, awaited her decision. Her dragons were restless, sensing the tension of the moment. She could see how formidable the Unsullied were, how effortlessly they could become an unshakable spear point to plunge into her enemies. Her plan had been carefully laid. She would feign interest in purchasing the entire slave army, then free them in a single stroke, turning their loyalty to her as a liberator. She knew these Unsullied were men bound by the cruelties of the good masters, who prided themselves on breaking their spirits. Daenerys had told herself that liberating them was not just a means to an end, but also an act of mercy, a righteous deed that would echo across Essos. But as she stood there, watching Krasny smirk at her, another thought began to coil in her mind. The Dothraki behind her were uneasy. Some had grown to trust her, even to love her, but many saw the Unsullied as something alien, men who did not scream or revel in slaughter the way the Dothraki did. Men who fought silently and without fear, strange creatures of discipline rather than savage joy. She also recalled the times she had pinned her hopes on foreigners, or men whose loyalties she could not fully decipher, men like Xaro Zoan Daxos in Karth who had, in his own way, tried to use her for his ambitions. And in the hidden recesses of Daenerys's mind, she remembered how her brother Viserys had harped on every promise of an alliance, betraying that trust if it meant an extra coin in his pocket or a tilt at the Iron Throne. She remembered how illusions of loyalty could shatter. Perhaps, she thought, if I rely on the Dothraki alone, I will not disrupt the natural order of things so drastically. She sensed that forging a new bond with thousands of Unsullied, men once enslaved, would make her carry a weight she might not be ready to bear. Could she risk losing the fragile unity within her Khalasar? Already, her blood rider Ricardo had expressed some bitterness, half in jest, half in doubt, about calling these silent soldiers blood of my blood. Her dragons, too, needed time to grow. Regal, Viserion, and Drogon were majestic in her eyes, but they were not yet the unstoppable force they might one day become. Perhaps she did not require a massive army to protect them, so long as her Dothraki rode swiftly and fiercely. The Unsullied would be unstoppable foot soldiers, yes, but a part of her wondered if she would simply be inheriting the same cruelty and the same cycle of violence the slavers had perpetuated, just under her new banner. Krasny's waited, impatiently flicking a meaty hand in the air. The older woman at his side, his interpreter, turned to Daenerys and spoke in the common tongue, her tone mechanical. The good master says the Unsullied are yours if you have the payment. All 2,000, as you requested, plus the ones still in training. Daenerys hesitated. The moment of choice hung in the sizzling air. She heard Ser Jorah step forward slightly, his voice low in her ear. Your Grace, you know what is at stake. The Unsullied might well be the best means we have of getting to Westeros. Gold can be found in plundered cities, but loyal, disciplined men are far rarer. Daenerys heard him, but she also felt a pang in her chest. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling every indignity she had seen inflicted upon the helpless. If she freed the Unsullied, they would be beholden to her, yes. But in that same moment, she realized that to buy them, to claim them, was to join in some measure with the slavers. It would be a calculated manipulation, lying to the good masters until she turned on them. Could she truly remain unsullied herself by stepping into their market? She had once believed the answer was yes, but she was no longer so certain. She turned to Krasny's. I have decided, she said in Valyrian, surprising him. His beady eyes flicked with the realization that she understood his every insult. I do not want your Unsullied. A tense silence fell, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the harbors of Astapor. Krasny's shifted uncomfortably. He had expected a large profit. What do you mean?" he sputtered. "All these negotiations, and now—" "I will not buy them," Daenerys repeated. She turned on her heel to leave, her cloak swirling around her. The translator scrambled to keep up, and the good masters erupted into outraged shouting as Daenerys walked away, her retinue forming up around her protectively. She could sense her Dothraki warriors almost breathing a sigh of relief. There would be no uneasy alliance with the silent eunuchs. They would remain Dothraki, forged in Khalasar tradition. Astapor's streets buzzed with the gossip of the foreign Khaleesi who had come to buy the Unsullied and left empty-handed. While resting in a small compound that she had rented, she listened to arguments from Ser Jorah and from Arstan Whitebeard, who was actually Ser Barristan Selmy in disguise, though she did not yet know it. Ser Jorah argued that without the Unsullied, how could she hope to cross the narrow sea and wrest back the Iron Throne? Her Dothraki were fearsome raiders, but they had never faced the disciplined armies of Westeros. Barristan, more tactful, questioned whether it was wise to rely solely on one group of warriors with a proud and fractious culture. Daenerys only knew that her instincts told her not to become another slaver. Deep inside, she felt it was not her path. If she freed the Unsullied, she would upend Astapor, and perhaps unleash chaos upon the region. She was tired of being a breaker of chains if the chains only reappeared elsewhere. In some corner of her mind, she told herself she could always return to liberate them later, when she was strong enough to be sure no new tyrant would rise in her wake. For now, her Khalasar would suffice, and her quest for the throne would proceed along a more cautious route. Within a day, the angered good masters of Astapor ordered Daenerys to depart the city, lest they exact some punishment upon her. Daenerys left willingly, accompanied by her small retinue of freedmen, Ser Jorah, Barristan, still under his assumed name, the loyal Dothraki, and her 3 dragons. She wondered if her choice was wise, but the relief she saw in Rikaro's face, in Ago's, in Jogo's, soothed her momentary doubt. These men had followed her across the Red Waste. They had proclaimed her their Khaleesi long ago, when Khal Drogo fell. At least she knew them. At least she understood the Dothraki ways. She led them east, away from the wrath of Astapor, traveling under the unrelenting sky. They reached a swath of green fields near the coast, a place where her people could graze their horses and rest for a while. Her dragons hunted small game along the rivers. Ser Jorah approached her almost every day with caution, reminding her that if she meant to sail for Westeros, she needed ships. Daenerys knew that ships would not simply present themselves. Perhaps she would have to take them as the Dothraki took all things. But with only a few hundred Dothraki, and some freed slaves from her earlier journeys, her strength was limited. Rumors drifted to her that the city of Yunkai, not far to the north, relied on mercenaries rather than a standing army. Perhaps that could be a place to gain allies, or at the very least horses, supplies, and coin. As she considered her next step, she thought of her birthright. She imagined King's Landing, the Iron Throne glimmering in torchlight, the Red Keep looming over the city. She thought of her father's madness, the treachery that had ended House Targaryen's reign, and the many lords of Westeros who would flock to or flee from the sight of the last Targaryen returning with a Khalasar. Perhaps, she mused, a Khalasar alone would not be enough to seat her upon the throne. She needed alliances she could trust. Yet the Dothraki were all she had for now. Their loyalty was absolute so long as she remained strong. So long as her dragons grew, no call would challenge her. She gathered her blood riders by a small campfire one evening. The smell of roasting goat filled the air, and the sound of the nearby sea layered softly beneath the crackling flames. Daenerys gazed into the eyes of Rikaro, Ago, and Jogo. They had once been Drogo's blood riders. Now they were hers. "My blood riders," she said in Dothraki. "You have followed me across the desert, to Karth and beyond. I have brought you to Astapor in search of an army, yet I found none I wished to claim. But I still mean to cross the sea, to a land of green hills and tall castles. Will you ride with me over the waves?" Rikaro squinted at her, as though trying to gauge if this was a test. Across the water, "The horses cannot run," he said. "We fear the salt water. Our ancestors say a Khalasar who crosses to the poison water meets death." Daenerys felt the old frustration well up in her. She had asked this question many times, and she knew the Dothraki disliked the notion of crossing the sea. They called it the poison water. Some among them clung to old superstitions. "That may be," she said quietly, "but I am your Khaleesi. My dragons are the blood of my blood, and I ask you to trust me." "We trust you, blood of Drogo," Drogo said. He placed his hand over his heart. "We trust the mother of dragons. If you say we cross, then we cross." Daenerys nodded. She felt a flicker of relief and gratitude. They might hesitate and grumble, but in the end, they would follow her. She let her gaze drift from one face to the next. "Then let us ride north, to Yunkai. We will see if the wise masters there have ships or coin to buy them. If they refuse us, we will take what we need." She could see a glimmer in their eyes, the same savage pride that had once ignited under Khal Drogo's presence. Her heart ached at the memory of her husband, but she swallowed it and steeled herself. If she must become a conqueror to be a queen, so be it. Their Khalasar set out the next morning at dawn. The sea mists dissipated as the sun climbed high, and the Dothraki rode with whoops and war cries, spurring their horses across the open land. Daenerys rode at the head, her silver mare a gift from Drogo so long ago. Ser Jorah rode nearby, watchful and concerned, a permanent crease between his brows. Barristan, still calling himself Arstan, guided a donkey loaded with supplies. In the skies above, her 3 dragons soared in graceful arcs, occasionally plunging to snatch an unsuspecting gull or hare. They came upon villages in the outlying regions of Yunkai, tiny settlements that recognized the banners of the wise masters. The villagers, upon seeing the Dothraki horde, shrank back in terror or fled into nearby fields. Daenerys ordered her Khalasar not to pillage or slaughter, though she knew the temptation was strong for them. The Dothraki believed in taking spoils from the weak, but she insisted on a show of restraint. Even so, the villagers offered terrified bribes of food and water to appease the horse lords. Daenerys accepted, but only to sustain her people. In her tent at night, she wrestled with her conflicting feelings. She was not the breaker of chains this time, not the liberator. She had turned away from the Unsullied, from the notion of freeing them. It left a hollow ache in her. But she told herself that she still was not a pillaging warlord, that she took only what was needed, that she was forging a new path, one that did not rely on mass enslavement or on a soulless army. Perhaps she was forging a more natural bond with the Dothraki. In the darkness, she imagined the Iron Throne again, the cold metal against her skin. Would it be worth it to come home with only horsemen and dragons? When the spires of Yunkai finally appeared on the horizon, the golden city walls shimmered in the midday sun. Yunkai was known for its bed slaves and wealth, if not for its might. Daenerys saw outriders gallop in from the city gates, likely seeking to parley or to survey the extent of her forces. She ordered her Khalasar to halt a mile away from the walls, setting up a sprawling camp that soon sprang to life with the hustle and bustle of horse trading, meal preparations, and idle conversation in the harsh guttural tones of the Dothraki tongue. Before evening, an envoy from Yunkai approached, a richly dressed man with perfumed hair and a golden tokar, accompanied by a few nervous guards. He announced himself as Grazdan Iraz, speaking with that same tone of practiced condescension that reminded Daenerys of the slavers in Astapor. He looked around at the sea of tents, the glinting eyes of the Dothraki braves, and her 3 dragons perched on the poles of her pavilion, exhaling little curls of smoke. He made a show of politeness. "I greet you, Daenerys Stormborn, and I say this with all humility. Yunkai is not interested in war with you. We are a peaceful city. I bring you gifts from the wise masters, who ask only that you pass us by." Servants behind him bore casks of wine, platters of fruit, and cloth of the finest silk. Daenerys waved them closer, letting her people inspect the gifts. "I thank the wise masters," she said, "but I am told Yunkai is wealthy and that your city trades in many things, including ships. Are there ships for sale in Yunkai? Grasden tilted his head with a slight smile. We have vessels, yes, but those belong to certain noble families, not to the city itself. If the noble families wish to sell, they will sell. But I suspect they will not lightly part with their fleets. They are needed for commerce. He paused, glancing warily at her dragons. If gold is what you seek, you will find many merchants eager to trade. The slaves, well, that too. I hear Astapor did not suit you. Ser Yora bristled, but Daenerys held up a hand for silence. I do not buy slaves. I do not traffic in men. She tried not to let the contradiction sink in. She was traveling with Dothraki, who took slaves in their raids if left unchecked. I merely wish to cross the sea one day, to reclaim what is mine by right. Yunkai might gain an ally, if it chooses to help me. Grasden's smile turned a shade more guarded. An ally, yes, but we know your father's name, and the destruction House Targaryen once wrought. Yunkai has no quarrel with you, but nor do we wish to be drawn into your wars. Daenerys felt her temper flare. She was tired of these half-veiled refusals. Then perhaps you should find a quarrel worth fighting, or remain out of my way. She turned to dismiss him, but before she could speak again, the man coughed discreetly, drawing her attention back. The wise masters would offer you gold and many precious gifts if you simply ride past our walls, he said. We ask nothing else. We desire only peace. Daenerys glanced at Ser Yora and at the silent Barristan. She knew that, in truth, she needed coin to buy ships, perhaps not from Yunkai itself but from other coastal lords or merchants in Pentos, Myr, or Volantis. A sudden solution leapt into her mind. If Yunkai was eager to avoid conflict, perhaps it could pay her enough gold to fund a modest fleet. She did not have to sack the city. She did not want to become a butcher. Tell your wise masters this, she said, facing Grasden with regal composure. I will ride by Yunkai, leaving it untouched, if they pay me 10 chests of gold coins. High-quality gold, not adulterated with lesser metals, and enough to purchase ships from the free cities. If they accept, I give you my oath. My Khalasar shall do no harm to your people. The choice is theirs. Grasden blinked in surprise, but he bowed deeply. I shall deliver your terms. It is a modest price for peace, I think. Before he departed, Daenerys added, and if they do not pay, know that I will take what I need. No city can stand forever behind high walls if a dragon flies overhead. She let her gaze drift toward Drogon, her largest, black-scaled dragon, who hissed softly as if in agreement. Grasden left in haste, the line of gifts left behind in the dust. Daenerys found herself alone in her pavilion with her advisors. She turned to Ser Yora. Is this wise? Extorting them for gold might sow hatred, even if we do not sack the city. It may come back to haunt us. Yora's eyes gleamed with cautious approval. War is about power, Khaleesi. Demanding tribute is not a crime if it can be done with minimal bloodshed. It will serve your purpose. With enough gold, you might buy half a fleet. A small portion of it, anyway. Barristan or Arstan regarded her quietly. It is better than unleashing your Khalasar upon them, he said. We have grown, but we are not large enough to besiege a well-fortified city, not without great losses. If they pay, it will spare many lives. She nodded, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She recalled her fervent, youthful dream of being a queen loved by her people. This was not love. It was fear and extortion. But perhaps one day, when she sat the Iron Throne, she could afford to be merciful in truth. For now, she had to appear strong. When the Yunkish envoy returned the next day, carrying the demanded gold in lacquered chests, Daenerys tried to hide her relief. They presented her with shining golden honors in the shape of discs stamped with Yunkish idols. She had some of her men melt a coin in a small crucible to test its purity. Finding it acceptable, she accepted the tribute, issuing an official statement that Yunkai was under her protection for the next 30 days, and that her Khalasar would skirt the city walls without entering. Grasden left with the semblance of courtesy, though Daenerys suspected his hatred burned beneath the surface. That night, She summoned her blood riders and Ser Jorah to discuss what came next. The gold would help, but she was still uncertain where to buy ships, or from whom. The news from the free cities was scattered and contradictory. Some said Pentos was in turmoil, others that Lys or Tyrosh might be more open to selling old cogs or galleys at a decent price. She decided on Pentos, recalling that it was once her home in exile, if only briefly. The Magisters of Pentos had a history of meddling with Targaryens, but they were also practical. Gold spoke loudly, especially if it came with the promise of future favor from a queen with dragons. They broke camp, riding north and then veering west, forging a path toward the coast. The journey was long, but Daenerys felt a renewed sense of direction. Each day, she watched her dragons grow more confident in flight, though they were not yet large enough to serve as war mounts. She told herself that, in time, they would become the key to her conquest. For now, they were a powerful symbol, a warning to any who might underestimate her. The weeks passed in a blur of open plains, scattered villages, and lonely roads. Sometimes her Khalasar ventured near the borders of other city-states. Word spread of the silver-haired Khaleesi who had spurned the Unsullied in Astapor, extorted gold from Yunkai, and commanded living dragons. Some towns shut their gates at her approach. Others offered grain and wine in hopes of appeasing her. Daenerys acted only what was necessary, unwilling to let her people starve, but also careful not to appear as a mindless marauder. The delicate dance of appearances weighed heavily on her every decision. One evening, as they camped near a broad river, Daenerys walked alone along the water's edge. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, and the night air felt cool against her skin. She could hear the distant laughter of Dothraki around their fires, see the silhouettes of horses moving in the gloom. She remembered how Drogo had once told her of the Grass Sea, how it went on forever and shaped the Dothraki into what they were. Her dragons flitted overhead, their shadows passing across the moonlit ground. Daenerys found Jorah waiting by a cluster of rocks, as though he had anticipated her need for privacy. He bowed his head when she approached. She had long suspected his feelings for her, but she had not decided how to handle them. Now she appreciated his presence. "You trouble yourself too much with your own doubts, Your Grace," he said quietly, his Westerosi accent a stark contrast to the Dothraki around them. "You do what you must to survive and to gather strength. That is what kings and queens do." She looked at him, her expression wistful. "I remember wanting to free slaves, to end suffering, and now I'm turning a blind eye to the slavers. I took gold from Yunkai and let them keep their bed slaves. What does that make me?" "It makes you a ruler with priorities," Jorah replied. "If you tried to free every slave from every city, you might never reach Westeros. And if you did, it would be with a fraction of the men you have now. The Seven Kingdoms would laugh at your ambition." She wanted to argue that she did not care about their laughter, but she could not. She did care, because if the lords of Westeros did not fear or respect her, her claim would crumble. No, she needed to be strong, needed to have enough of an army that they would bend the knee the moment they saw her banners or risk Dragonfire. Perhaps that was the lesson of power. You cannot free everyone at once. You can only move step by step, forging alliances and gaining advantage until you stand tall enough to make a lasting change. Jorah touched her arm gently. "One day, when you are queen of the Seven Kingdoms, you can influence the world to move away from slavery. But you must first have the power to do so." Daenerys nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. She left Jorah by the rocks and returned to her tent, where she tried to find sleep. But her dreams were troubled by visions of Astapor's Unsullied, standing in silent lines, their hollow eyes fixed on her. In the dream, she reached out to them, but they dissolved into ash, leaving her alone on a field of bones. By the time her Khalasar reached the port city of Meereen, she knew that rumors of her approach must have preceded her. Meereen was mightier than Yunkai, with higher walls and a proud tradition of pit fighting. She considered whether she could again demand gold for safe passage, but she was wary of pushing her luck. The memory of Astapor's outraged slavers lurked in the back of her mind, and she did not want every city in Slaver's Bay uniting against her. So she sent messengers to Meereen's great masters, asking for the right to trade in their markets for 1 week, offering some of the gold from Yunkai as a token of goodwill. She promised to keep her Khalasar outside the walls. By evening, she had a reply. The great masters agreed to a short visit, so long as she limited the number of armed men entering the city. They did not want the Dothraki swirling through their streets, a fearsome wave of potential violence. Daenerys entered Meereen with only a few trusted warriors, Rakaro, Ser Jorah, Barristan, and a handful of others. She left most of her Khalasar camped some distance away. Even so, she felt eyes watching her warily as she rode through the massive gates. The city was grand, with pyramids that soared above the skyline, their steps painted or hung with colorful banners. She could smell the many scents of a bustling metropolis. Roasted meats, perfume, and the stench of refuse in cramped alleys. They settled in a small estate rented by Barristan's careful negotiations, a place ringed by high walls and guarded by discreet mercenaries who did not ask many questions. Daenerys' plan was simple: secure passage on ships, or at least arrange a meeting with captains who would be willing to sail her Khalasar to Westeros, though the very idea made her uncertain how the horses would fare. Alternatively, if ships were too expensive or the captains refused, she might gather enough resources to travel overland around the Valyrian Peninsula, an arduous and dangerous journey indeed. Yet the more she asked around, the more she realized she would need an extraordinary fortune to transport even a fraction of her Dothraki by sea. Any sail captain who heard about her dragons hiked up their fees, hoping to profit from her rumored wealth. She visited dockside taverns in disguise, listening to the chatter of sailors, picking up hints about who might be for hire. Ser Jorah and Barristan accompanied her, watchful. A few captains expressed open interest, too open, Daenerys suspected. They reeked of opportunists, men who would gladly betray her for a higher bidder. Others were downright dismissive, especially those who had heard the stories of her father's madness or who feared crossing the narrow sea under the auspices of a Targaryen exile. She felt frustration building within her. Perhaps she should have simply taken the Unsullied, used them to seize ports by force, and claimed the ships herself. Late one night, she sat at a rough wooden table in a corner of a dilapidated tavern near Meereen's harbor. A single lantern above cast flickering shadows across the walls. Ser Jorah stood behind her, arms folded, glaring at anyone who lingered too long near the Khaleesi. Barristan was absent, left behind to guard the estate, but Rakaro stood by the door, suspicious of all these foreign devils who stank of stale wine. Daenerys sipped water from a chipped cup, scanning the tavern for a certain bearded Pentoshi who was said to command 3 stout galleys. He had asked for a meeting and promised a fair deal. She doubted fair meant the same to him as it did to her, but she was desperate enough to listen. The man finally arrived, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. He introduced himself as Belnano Terys, with a sweeping bow to her. "A pleasure to meet the Mother of Dragons," he said with a showy flourish. His accent was thick, and his wide girth suggested he took full advantage of any port's pleasures. "I hear you wish to travel to Westeros with your, horde of Dothraki. And your dragons, of course." Daenerys gave him a small smile. "That is true. Can you do it?" He shrugged. "Not alone, no. 3 galleys can carry perhaps 100 men each, with supplies, plus stables for a limited number of horses. Not thousands, but I know other captains who can combine their fleets. We might carry your people in segments if that is acceptable." She stifled a pang of dismay. Transporting her Khalasar in segments would split her forces and leave them vulnerable. Could she risk that? "Your price?" she asked. He chuckled. "Oh, it will be considerable, Your Grace. For each ship, perhaps 15,000 gold honors paid up front. We will require extra for the horses, as well as hazard pay for sailing under the threat of dragons." Ser Jorah let out a disgusted snort. "That's robbery." Belnano smiled apologetically. "You must understand, good knight. You are asking for a service that invites the wrath of any who oppose House Targaryen. My men risk war on the open sea. My ships risk being set aflame by an unruly dragon. We must be compensated." Daenerys fixed him with her lilac eyes, letting silence linger. "Very well," she said at length. Show me you can gather enough ships, and I will consider paying your price or something near it. But you will only receive payment upon sailing, not before." His expression soured. "I'm afraid the custom is half now, half on arrival. That's the way of things. We must protect ourselves. Otherwise, a captain might cross the sea and find no coin waiting for him. I do not say you would do such a thing, but the principle stands." She studied him, the flickering lantern lighting up the sweat beading on his brow. "You risk losing a fortune if you do not trust me. On the other hand, if you do trust me and we succeed, you might gain an ally in the future Queen of Westeros." Belnano gave a theatrical sigh. "Alas, the world is not built on trust, my sweet queen. It is built on contracts and gold." Daenerys felt her temper building. She knew this would go nowhere. The man was a leech, draining every coin from her. She rose abruptly from the table, startling him. "Then I see no reason to continue this talk tonight." She turned and strode toward the door, Yora and Ricardo in her wake. They stepped into the cool night air, the smell of fish and seaweed clinging to the breeze. Daenerys rubbed her temples. "I will not be strong-armed by these captains. If the cost of these ships is too high, I might as well conquer my own port and take them." Ser Yora nodded gravely. "If your dragons were larger, you could break any city you wished. But they are still small." Daenerys knew that too well. They could not burn fleets or tear down city walls yet. She felt the weight of every choice bearing down on her. Should she wait in Meereen for them to grow? Months, perhaps years? The prospect was maddening. Or should she risk an overland route? But that might lead her into savage lands, uncertain alliances, and slow progress, while the houses of Westeros continued their games of thrones without her. Early the next morning, as she broke her fast on figs and watered wine in the rented estate, Barristan approached with a troubled expression. "Your Grace, word from the city. The great masters grow uneasy with your presence. They fear you might attempt to storm Meereen as you did with Yunkai, though you did not storm Yunkai precisely. Still, they worry about your extortion." She sighed. "Have we done anything to provoke them?" "Not precisely, but you know how slaver lords talk. They see the threat, not your restraint." Daenerys toyed with the idea of simply leaving now, continuing on to Pentos. She had enough gold left from Yunkai, combined with some trade deals arranged in Meereen, to at least begin negotiations with other merchants along the coast. She did not relish another confrontation with a city that could field an army. So she made her decision. "We leave Meereen, gather the men, gather the supplies. We'll ride for Pentos." Thus began another long trek, one that tested the resolve of her Dothraki. They were eager to ride free, disdaining the cramped confines of city walls, and they whooped with excitement once they saw the open plains again. The heat of Essos bore down relentlessly, but they were a hardy people, thriving under the wide sky. The dragons soared overhead, sometimes scaring herds of cattle or wild goats. Daenerys occasionally smiled at the sight, remembering how wondrous and impossible it had felt the first time she had seen her dragons fly. Now it was her new normal. They traveled for many days, heading northwest. The grasslands gave way to rougher terrain, and Daenerys' scouts reported caravans passing by, heading south toward Meereen. She chose not to harass them, though her more restless riders sometimes complained, itching for pillage. She reminded them that they would have plenty of plunder if they ever reached Westeros. "There are cities of gold there," she promised, remembering the half-truths her brother had once spun to entice Khal Drogo. When they neared the region south of the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys felt a stirring of memory. She had once traveled these lands in fear and desperation, with Khal Drogo's Khalasar. Now she was the Khaleesi in truth, with her own loyal riders. Her dragons had grown since last she was here, and her own resolve had hardened. She had been a frightened girl, sold in marriage, and now she was a woman who commanded hundreds, perhaps thousands, of armed warriors. At night, she gathered her confidants around the fire. Ser Yora's face bore the weariness of endless travel, his beard flecked with dust. Barristan, still going by Arstan in front of the Dothraki, remained stoic, though she had noticed the occasional flash of admiration in his eyes when he looked upon her. Ricardo, Ago, and Jogo sprawled comfortably, men at ease in the bosom of the great grass sea. Dany's other followers, Iri, Jiki, and the freedwomen, huddled near, glancing warily at the men. She spoke in a low voice. "We are some distance from Pentos, but we will not arrive unnoticed. The Magisters have eyes everywhere. They will hear whispers of a Targaryen with dragons and a Khalasar. Some might see an opportunity. Some might see a threat. How do I make them see an ally?" Ser Jorah scratched at his stubble. "Illyrio Mopatis, if he still holds influence in Pentos, might be your best chance. He once sheltered you and your brother back when you were children. He is a sly man, but he might be convinced to help if he thinks you can succeed. He is not overly fond of the Lannisters or of the chaos in Westeros." Daenerys remembered Illyrio well. His lavish manse, his indulgent feasts. She also recalled that he had orchestrated her marriage to Khal Drogo, albeit under the pretense of forging a powerful alliance. She did not relish the thought of returning to him, hat in hand, but she had few other leads. "Then to Pentos we ride. With luck, we find Illyrio or a Magister like him who can see the benefit of my cause." She tried not to dwell on what might happen if her quest for ships was continually denied. To wander Essos forever, never seeing Westeros, never challenging the usurpers who had stolen her birthright, that was unthinkable. She had come too far. For a moment, she indulged in a fantasy. She imagined her dragons grown to monstrous size, their shadows sweeping over King's Landing, black wings blotting out the sun. She imagined the lords of Westeros kneeling, hearing the thunder of Dothraki hooves at their gates. But then she thought of the destruction, the fire, and the terror that might come with such a conquest. She wanted to be a queen who saved people, not burned them. But she could not ignore that conquest was rarely gentle. As the Khalasar continued northwest, the terrain grew drier. They camped in rocky gullies where water was scarce. Ricardo and Ago led hunting parties, returning with hares, gazelle, and on one occasion, a small lion they had slain. Daenerys noticed the riders' hunger for glory. They boasted of their kills, calling each other brave warriors. She remembered how the Dothraki prized strength above all else. A part of her felt relief that she had not introduced the Unsullied into this proud culture. How would the Dothraki regard eunuch soldiers who felt no pain, no fear, no lust for plunder? The tension might have shattered her fragile unity before it even began. One afternoon, as they rode near a bend in a small river, Daenerys spotted a caravan in the distance, guarded by mounted mercenaries. The caravan flew banners she did not recognize, white with a turquoise serpent. Curious, she ordered a group of her blood riders to approach. The caravan guards formed up warily, but when they saw Daenerys's dragons circling overhead, they visibly paled. Eventually, one man rode out to meet her, declaring they were traders bound for Volantis. Daenerys had heard that Volantis was a great city, ancient and proud, with its own fleets. But it lay far to the south, and the Volantines were known to be strong slavers. She politely asked if they knew any rumors of Westeros. The trader, a wiry man with sunken cheeks, seemed eager to please. "We hear a king in the north rose and fell, and now the Iron Throne is contested by Lannisters, Tyrells, and a boy who calls himself Aegon Targaryen. Or so the rumor goes. Some say he is your nephew." Daenerys felt a jolt, her heart skipping a beat. A boy calling himself Aegon Targaryen? She exchanged a look with Ser Jorah. Her brother Rhaegar had a son named Aegon, who was supposedly murdered in the sack of King's Landing. How could he have survived? Or was this just another pretender? She remembered hearing something about the Golden Company supporting a pretender. The trader shrugged. "We only know what we hear in passing. He has landed in the Stormlands, they say, claiming the rightful Targaryen inheritance. Perhaps if you hurry, you might reclaim it first." He gave a nervy laugh, then rode away with his fellows, not waiting for more questions. Daenerys felt a swirl of emotions: anger, confusion, and a strange hope. If there was another Targaryen claiming the throne, it might mean an alliance or a bitter rivalry. She was not sure which. Could it truly be her nephew? If so, he was more the rightful heir than she was by rights of succession. The thought unsettled her deeply. Her claim to the throne was something she had cherished as her destiny. She was the last Targaryen, or so she had believed. She rode in silence for a long stretch, ignoring the concerned looks of Ser Jorah. Finally, when they made camp, she beckoned him aside. "Tell me truly, Jorah, you are from Westeros. Is it possible that Prince Rhaegar's son survived?" Jorah hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The mountain was said to have killed Prince Aegon and Princess Elia, but the stories were never perfectly consistent. It's not impossible that the boy was smuggled away. Or this could simply be a fraud. There have been Targaryen pretenders before. With the Golden Company rumored to support him, well, they were founded by Bittersteel, a Targaryen bastard loyalist. They have a history of championing such claims. Daenerys felt the pang of uncertainty. If this Aegon was real and had the Golden Company at his back, he might already be making headway in Westeros. By the time she arrived, he could have crowned himself king. The Dothraki do not understand such intricacies, but she did. A war of Targaryen succession would be a bitter twist of fate. "If he is truly of my blood, we should be allies, not rivals," she said, thinking aloud. "Unless he denies my claim." Jorah lowered his eyes. He might do just that, if he truly believes he is the rightful heir, or if those around him push him to stand alone. But you also have something he doesn't: dragons. That alone might force him to treat with you. A swirl of possibility ignited in her mind. Perhaps she could ride to Westeros, present her dragons, and unite with this Aegon if he were genuine. Together, they could crush the Lannisters and all who stood against them. But she needed ships to get there in time, ships she did not yet have. "Then we must press on," she said quietly. "There is no time to waste." Every step of the journey now felt charged with urgency. Daenerys pushed the Khalasar to move swiftly, pausing only when necessary for rest and forage. The days bled into weeks, dusty roads stretching underfoot. She sent scouts ahead, who reported that Pentos lay only another week's ride away. She wondered if Illyrio Mopatis still lived in his grand manse. She wondered if the Magister would greet her with open arms or with suspicion, now that she came not as a timid girl but as a Khaleesi with dragons at her command. Finally, at the crest of a low hill, Daenerys gazed out and saw the hazy outline of Pentos's walls in the distance. The sight stirred memories of the beginning of her journey, of the plush manse W. Here Illyrio had pampered her and Viserys. She remembered the hawk-like stare of her brother, the sting of his words. "You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?" She had awakened the dragon indeed, but not in the way Viserys had imagined. She had become the mother of dragons, forging her own destiny. She ordered her Khalasar to make camp a short distance from the city, then took a smaller retinue for her entrance. Ser Jorah rode by her side, Barristan behind her. Ricardo led a small group of Dothraki, while the rest waited, watchful. The gates of Pentos loomed, guarded by men in shining half-helms. Daenerys expected them to bar her way, but to her surprise, the gates stood open. A small delegation awaited her inside, a retinue of Pentoshi soldiers in bright livery and a stout figure clad in a deep blue robe. She recognized Illyrio Mopatis at once. Time had thickened his frame further, and the streaks of gray in his forked beard added a certain dignity, or perhaps decrepitude, to his appearance. But he still wore the same ingratiating smile, lips perpetually moist as though he was about to taste something savory. "Princess Daenerys," he called out, waddling forward with arms spread wide. "Or should I say, Queen Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, mother of dragons, the Undul's rightful ruler, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea." He went on listing every title he could recall, ending with an exaggerated bow. "Welcome back to Pentos. I have long awaited this day." Daenerys dismounted smoothly, allowing a stable boy to take the reins of her silver mare. She studied Illyrio's face. "You appear well, Magister. I did not expect such a warm welcome." Illyrio laughed. "My dear Daenerys, you wound me. Have I not always been your loyal friend? Come, you shall stay in my manse. All is prepared for you." Let us not speak in the streets." His eyes flicked warily to the Dothraki around her, and to the shape of Drogon gliding in the sky above, trailing smoke. She decided to accept his hospitality for now. A show of goodwill might open the door to the ships she needed. She gestured for her retinue to follow, though she sensed the tension in her Dothraki. They despised the cramped confines of city alleys, the prying eyes of foreign lords. But they had followed her this far, and they would follow her still. Illyrio's manse was as she remembered it. Marble pillars, lush gardens, and fragrant air scented with exotic blossoms. Servants flitted about with trays of spiced wine and honeyed meats, leading Daenerys and her people to a spacious courtyard. Illyrio fussed with a seat of honor, draping it with silks for her comfort. Once she and her closest confidants were settled, Illyrio dismissed his servants with a wave of his bejeweled hand. "Now we can speak freely. My dear queen, I am so delighted to see you have come so far. Who would have believed it? You have 3 dragons, a mighty Khalasar, and rumors swirl of your feats. Truly, you are blessed by the gods." Daenerys inclined her head, accepting the flattery with a neutral expression. "I am glad to find you in good health, Magister. I will not waste time. I have come to Pentos to purchase ships. I need to cross the narrow sea to press my claim. Will you help me?" Illyrio smiled indulgently. "Ah, you have grown direct, I see. Very well. Let us speak plainly. I can help you, yes, but the question is at what cost? Ships are expensive, and captains must be convinced. There is also the matter of the Iron Bank of Bravos, which funds many voyages. And, of course, the political ramifications. Pentos is sworn, in a manner of speaking, to avoid angering the free cities or the great powers of Westeros." Daenerys felt her patience wane. "I have gold. I also have dragons. I will not be deterred by political niceties." Illyrio gave a small laugh. "I would expect nothing less. Still, you must understand. The lords of Westeros may be in turmoil, but they still have power, and the Lannisters have deep coffers. The city of Pentos cannot openly support a Targaryen invasion without incurring potential retribution should you fail. And the Magisters do not wish to lose their fortunes." Ser Jorah, who had been silent thus far, interjected. "If Daenerys fails, none of this will matter. But if she succeeds, Pentos stands to gain her favor, and trade privileges influence protection from raiders. It is a risk with a potentially huge reward." Illyrio bobbed his head, his chins rippling. Of course. I am not blind. Hence why I am still so gracious. Let us say, for argument's sake, I am able to gather a fleet of 50 ships. Enough to transport your Dothraki in segments. You would need to trust your captains not to sail away once half your forces are across." Daenerys felt a cold clench of unease at the thought of splitting her Khalasar. But what choice did she have? Unless she found a single monstrous fleet to carry everyone in one crossing, she might have to risk multiple voyages. She tried to project confidence. 50 ships is a start. Name your price." Illyrio gave a sly grin. "Ah, but this cannot be decided so easily. I must consult certain colleagues, men who control the docks and the shipyards. There is also the matter of the Golden Company." Her eyes narrowed. "What of them?" He spread his hands. "They have supposedly invaded Westeros with a boy claiming to be Aegon Targaryen, Prince Rhaegar's son, and thus your nephew. Their alliance is no small matter. If he proves successful, the lords of Westeros might rally to him, seeing him as the rightful heir. Where would that leave you?" Daenerys took a measured breath. "That depends on whether he truly is who he says. If he is, then we are family and we might unite. But I must see for myself. I must speak with him, or at least learn more." Illyrio's face gleamed with sweat. "If you do not mind a humble suggestion, I have some knowledge of the Golden Company's leaders. I might be able to arrange messages, test the waters, so to speak. If there is a chance for a peaceful accord between you and this Aegon, well, that would interest many potential supporters." She studied him, recalling how easily he had manipulated events in the past. Illyrio was cunning, to say the least. But she needed cunning if she was to navigate these treacherous waters. "Do it," she said. In the meantime, gather the ships you can, and name your price, so I can decide whether to pay it." He chuckled richly. "We will speak of it later after I have made inquiries. For now, rest, feast, enjoy Pentos. Your people can camp outside the city, of course, but I can arrange better accommodations for your chief retainers. We cannot have them sleeping in the dirt." Daenerys stiffened. "My blood riders prefer the open sky," she said bluntly. "As for me, I will remain with them, but I will come to your manse each day to discuss our plans." Illyrio gave a melodramatic sigh. "As you wish. A queen must keep her own counsel. I only hope you remember that I am your friend." Over the next few days, Daenerys found herself ensnared in Pentoshi politics, which seemed a labyrinth of half-truths, bribes, and alliances of convenience. Illyrio introduced her to fellow magisters, men with broad smiles and wandering hands, each eager to make a deal. She received offers of marriage from lesser lords who dreamed of wedding a Targaryen queen, as if her name alone was a commodity. She politely refused them all, focusing only on her goal: ships, a swift crossing, and the pursuit of knowledge about this so-called Aegon Targaryen. During these negotiations, her Khalasar remained outside the walls, growing restless and bored. Daenerys visited them often, bringing tidbits of news to keep them engaged. She even allowed a small number of them to ride through the outskirts of Pentos to purchase supplies. Illyrio arranged hawking exhibitions and small contests of archery to entertain them, but the Dothraki found such amusements tame compared to true raiding. Her dragons roamed the skies, sometimes alighting on the walls of Pentos, causing panic among the guards. Daenerys received more than one complaint about the beasts frightening the citizenry, but she ignored them. The dragons were a part of her, and if Pentos was nervous, so be it. Fear might keep them honest. As the days wore on, Illyrio claimed to be making headway in securing a fleet. He paraded several ship captains before her, men with greasy smiles who boasted of their seamanship. She had them swear oaths of loyalty, though she knew words alone would not bind them if they smelled a better profit. She offered them partial payment up front, less than they demanded, and promised the rest upon landing in Westeros. Some balked, some agreed. Slowly, painfully, a tentative deal began to coalesce. Then came the day Illyrio summoned her in excitement. She arrived at his manse and found him nearly quivering with anticipation. "I have had word from the Golden Company," he crowed, "or at least from a certain intermediary. They have indeed installed this Aegon in certain castles in the Stormlands. Rumor says he has secured Storm's End. They claim he is Rhaegar's trueborn son, swapped with another child to keep him safe." Daenerys felt a chill. If he truly had Storm's End, that was no small feat. The fortress was said to be nigh impregnable. How did he take it? Some say through guile, some say by a combination of siege and infiltration. Whatever the truth, it has unsettled the lords of the Stormlands. Some are bending the knee, others wait to see if the Iron Throne responds. Meanwhile, the Lannisters are occupied in King's Landing, the Tyrells hold the Reach, and the North is in chaos. She clenched her fists. "So the realm is ripe for the taking." Illyrio nodded. "Indeed, but you have competition. If this Aegon can sway the small folk by claiming to be the rightful heir of Rhaegar, and if he has the Golden Company behind him, he may secure the throne before you set foot on Westerosi shores." Daenerys drew a slow breath, forcing calm. "Then we must move faster. How many ships can you gather within a month?" "Perhaps 30, Illyrio said apologetically. "It takes time to gather more, but if you wait another few months, I might double that number." She knew a few more months could be the difference between uniting with Aegon or watching him seize the throne alone. Her mind churned with possibilities. If she arrived in Westeros too late, he might see her as a threat, not an ally. But if she arrived soon with too few ships, she risked stranding half her Khalasar and losing the advantage of her full strength. Standing in Illyrio's lavish hall, Daenerys realized that her decision at Astapor to spurn the Unsullied had led her down a path of dependency on fickle merchant princes. If she had taken them, perhaps she could have marched on Meereen, seized ships, consolidated power, and sailed already. But that was not the path she had chosen. She would not let regret rule her now. She had to forge ahead, trusting in her dragons, her Dothraki, and whatever alliances she could muster. In the weeks that followed, she wrestled with that quandary day and night. She tested the readiness of her ships, visited the docks, and demanded to see the holds where the horses would be kept. The captains grumbled about the dangers of transporting so many beasts across open water. The Dothraki, for their part, grew alarmed at the notion of stabling their precious mounts below decks. Some threatened to refuse to board, superstitions about poison water rising to the surface. Daenerys tried to calm them, promising that her dragons would watch over them, that she would personally see them through the crossing. Some believed her, some grumbled, but most would follow her regardless. She was their Khaleesi, the mother of dragons, and they had pledged their loyalty in blood. And all the while, she received tidbits of news from Westeros. More bannermen flocking to this rumored Aegon, the Lannisters entangled in feuds within the capital, the Tyrells consolidating power in the Reach, and the North still reeling from the Red Wedding. Every fresh rumor made her blood race. The time for waiting was nearly past. She could not linger in Pentos forever. At last, she ordered Illyrio to finalize the arrangements for the partial fleet he could muster. Some 30 ships of varying size and reliability. She hated the idea of splitting her Khalasar in multiple voyages, but she saw no alternative. She decided she would lead the first wave herself, along with half her Dothraki, her 3 dragons, Ser Jorah, Barristan, and her core followers. They would sail to Dorne, perhaps, or the Stormlands if she dared. She would then secure a foothold, a safe harbor, and send the ships back to ferry the rest. It was risky, but her blood sang for action. On the eve of departure, Daenerys stood atop the walls of Pentos, gazing out at the bay where her ships waited, bobbing in the moonlight. She could see the flickers of torchlight on the vessels. Behind her, the city sprawled, full of hidden agendas. Tomorrow, she would set sail for the land of her birth, the place she had never truly known. A swirl of emotions welled up: hope, fear, excitement, dread. Ser Jorah stood beside her, stoic as ever, though she could sense his anticipation. "We're truly going home," she murmured, not really to him, but to the wind. "I was born on Dragonstone, but I have never seen it. I have dreamed of Westeros all my life, and now I cross with only a fraction of the force I had hoped for." Jorah placed a hand on the parapet. "A fraction, yes, but you have dragons. No one else does. And you have the Dothraki, fiercely loyal for the most part. It may not be the grand invasion some might have imagined, but with cunning it might suffice. Seize a port, rally the small folk. They remember the tales of Targaryen dragons. Some will join you." She bowed her head. "If this Aegon is real, they might join him instead. I must see if we can unite. The Targaryen name must stand together, or else we tear each other apart for the amusement of the other great houses." "And if he proves false?" Jorah asked gently. Daenerys's lilac eyes hardened. "Then I will show him what becomes of pretenders." The night air felt heavy with destiny. She listened to the distant cries of gulls, the rustle of the wind across the water. In her mind's eye, she saw the Iron Throne again, felt the chill of its metal. Would she truly sit upon it in triumph, or die in some foreign land, just another pretender's footnote? She banished the doubt, recalling the heat of her dragon's breath, the unburnt power that coursed through her veins. She was Daenerys Stormborn, of the blood of old Valyria, and she would not be denied. That night, she slept fitfully, haunted by half-formed dreams. She dreamed of Drogo, his voice calling her name, leading her through fields of tall grass. She dreamed of a dragon roosting on a throne of black stone, its eyes burning with a fierce hunger. She dreamed of a boy with silver-gold hair, holding out his hand to her, calling her aunt. Even as shadows closed around them both, she woke in a cold sweat, her skin damp, her heart pounding. At dawn, the ships were readied. Daenerys and her blood riders guided the Dothraki onto the decks, some men trembling, others defiant, cursing the salt and the rolling waves. Her dragons took flight above, circling the fleet as if shepherding them. Illyrio stood on the docks, face shining with perspiration, waving a perfumed handkerchief in farewell. He had extracted his price, a promise of future trade benefits, some measure of influence in her court when she took the throne, and a portion of the gold she still carried from Yunkai. Daenerys had reluctantly agreed, though she knew that if she became queen, she would have to keep him at arm's length. As the moorings were cast off, Daenerys stood at the prow of the lead galley, the wind whipping her silver-gold hair around her face. She glanced back to see the silhouette of Pentos receding. The horse lords behind her gripped the rails, muttering prayers to their horse gods for safe passage across the poison water. Ser Jorah stood a few paces away, his gaze on her, protective and resolute. Barristan, still known to most as Arstan, watched the horizon with a night's calm. In the sky overhead, Drogon roared, and Viserion and Regal answered. She did not have the Unsullied's stoic discipline at her back. She did not have a vast horde of Sellswords, but she had her dragons, her Khalasar, and her own indomitable will. The deck rolled beneath her feet, and she felt a surge of exhilaration, laced with apprehension, as the wind filled the sails. "Westeros," she whispered, "I am coming." And so Daenerys Targaryen, who had chosen not to free the Unsullied at Astapor, set forth with only a loyal Khalasar and her 3 dragons, trusting that her determination, her cunning, and her bond with the fierce horse lords would be enough to reshape the fate of the 7 kingdoms. She had abandoned the path of the liberator, at least for now, embracing instead the path of the Khaleesi and the conqueror. The waves carried her forward, toward a world she had never truly seen yet had claimed as her own, toward a throne that might already be taken by another bearing her family name, and toward a destiny that would test every ounce of the dragon's fire within her. She would either rise victorious, forging a new dawn for House Targaryen, or be dashed upon the rocks of history. The sea sang beneath the hull, and Daenerys Stormborn sailed on, unyielding and unafraid. Daenerys Targaryen felt the deck lurch beneath her feet, the gentle sway of the galley soon turning into a more insistent rocking as the ship left the shelter of Pentos's harbor. Behind her, the rowers bent their backs to the oars, and overhead, the sails caught a stiffening breeze that carried the fleet out into the open sea. Across the water, 30 ships of varying size spread out in a loose formation. Some were cogs, their rounded hulls laden with the goods and supplies needed to feed and transport the Khalasar. Others were leaner galleys, sporting rows of oars that dipped in and out of the waves with relentless rhythm. Seagulls wheeled and cried, and above them all soared her 3 dragons, Black Drogon leading the way, with Regal's green wings flashing in the sun, and Viserion a pale streak against the wide sky. Even from the prow, Daenerys could hear the unrest of her Dothraki as they crowded the decks below, half of them refusing to leave their horses for fear the poison water might swallow everything they loved. Some clung to the rope railings, faces green with seasickness. Others muttered in tight clusters, their eyes flicking toward the horizon as though expecting some looming leviathan to emerge from the depths. She knew the crossing frightened them. Dothraki taboo ran deep, and the sea was an abomination in their beliefs. But they were here because they followed her, their Khaleesi who had birthed dragons from fire. They had pledged themselves when she was nothing but a young widow with 3 newly hatched WRMs. Now she would test the limits of their faith in her. She tried to keep her own fears and uncertainties hidden beneath a mask of calm. Leaning against the carved figurehead, she gazed westward, remembering all the stories Viserys had told her when they were children, about the rich fields and tall castles of Westeros, about the rightful seat of House Targaryen on the Iron Throne. So much had happened since those days of living in constant fear, exiles at the whim of other men. She had lost her brother to his own hubris, lost her husband Khal Drogo to a mortal wound and a treacherous TCH's magic. She had spared herself the cost of the Unsullied, turning her back on Astapor. She had traveled with her Khalasar across half of Essos, forging fragile alliances and collecting the gold that now paid for these ships. She had grown from a frightened girl to a woman who wielded both power and compassion, though she often questioned if her choices still aligned with the dream she once cherished, the dream of freeing slaves, of ending cruelty. This crossing would decide much about her future and the future of the Seven Kingdoms. Morning turned to afternoon, the sun climbing overhead and turning the sea into a glittering swath of silver blue. Daenerys felt eyes on her and turned to see Ser Jorah Mormont approaching from behind the mizzenmast. He stepped carefully around coils of rope and the clusters of Dothraki huddled near the gunwale. Seawater glistened on the deck, mixing with the sweat on men's brows. Jorah had a small, private smile for her, though worry clung to his features like a shadow. "Your Grace," he said, bowing his head. "The captain has indicated we'll have fair winds for the next few days. If all goes well, we should reach Dorne in perhaps 8 days' time." Daenerys nodded. She had chosen Dorne for her landing because she had heard rumors, long whispered in Essos, that the Dornish might hold lingering loyalties or at least sympathies for House Targaryen. Dorne had ties to the Martells, and Prince Rhaegar's wife, Elia Martell, had been from that bloodline. It was also rumored that Prince Doran Martell, the Lord of Sunspear, quietly resented the Lannisters for what had befallen his sister. If there was any place in Westeros that would not close its gates to a Targaryen's arrival, Dorne seemed the most likely. And from there, if she must, she could march north or east, forging alliances with houses that might be swayed by the sight of dragons overhead. Jorah joined her at the railing. Together they watched the waves break against the prow, foam and salt spraying the air. The Dothraki at the foredeck tried to steady themselves, some cursing softly in their language. "The men are uneasy," Jorah said, his voice low, "but they will endure if you remain strong. They look to you for reassurance." "Do they fear I'll falter?" Daenerys asked quietly. "Fear? No," Jorah replied, though he hesitated. "But they know this crossing is a test of their faith as well as of your leadership. The horses?" He glanced aft, where the ship's hold contained the prized mounts, many of which were still unsettled, stamping and kicking in the darkness below. "They keep worrying the beasts will succumb to sickness or panic. A few are already in a sorry state." She pressed her lips together, cursing the necessity of crossing water. This was the inevitable price for the dream of reclaiming the Iron Throne. "We'll see them through," she said. "My blood riders will care for them as best they can. Once we land, we'll have fresh grass and open skies again." She heard a strangled retch behind her, some poor Dothraki losing the battle with his gut. Others laughed nervously or spat curses into the wind. Daenerys closed her eyes, feeling the heat of the sun on her face, remembering the endless grass seas of Essos. Those days were behind her now. Her next step would be on the shores of the land her ancestors once ruled. The day wore on and the winds held fair. Daenerys busied herself by checking on the dragons, who soared between the ships, sometimes alighting on the rigging or the deck of a neighboring galley. Drogon landed on the forecastle once, shaking the timbers under his weight, and a few Dothraki scattered in alarm. The black dragon hissed, glaring around as if annoyed by their reaction, then spread his wings and took flight again. Rhaegal and Viserion dipped closer to the water, snapping at fish that leapt in the sun-dazzled waves. She took a moment to stroke Drogon's scaled flank when he next returned, feeling the ripple of muscle beneath her hand. They were larger now, still not the size of the dragons from the days of Aegon the Conqueror, but fearsome enough to rattle the hearts of men who had never seen such creatures. She prayed they would grow larger yet, for she might need their strength if the rumored war in Westeros had grown more chaotic than she imagined. On the second day at sea, the fleet encountered choppier waters. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a stiff wind began to hiss across the decks. Sailors called out for the Dothraki to take cover and to brace themselves, while the captains adjusted sails and rigging. By late afternoon, rain pelted the planks, and the sea turned gray and angry, the waves cresting higher and slamming against the hull. Daenerys stood near the mainmast with Ser Jorah, soaked to the bone, urging her people to move below for safety. The horses screamed in the hold, some rearing and bashing against the wooden partitions. Lightning forked across the sky. Thunder rumbled so loud it seemed to shake the ship. Daenerys had her arms around a shivering Dothraki girl, one of her freed handmaidens, trying to calm the child's sobs. The storm hammered the sails, threatened to snap the mast. Men slipped and fell on the rain-slicked deck, and more than one lost their grip on the ropes only to be flung sideways. She prayed to the gods, her own, the Dothrakis, the old and the new, for the storm to pass. Meanwhile, Yora roared orders at the sailors, who scurried to secure cargo and lash down whatever they could. The dragons shrieked overhead, battered by wind and rain. At one point, Daenerys glimpsed Drogon swooping dangerously low, clutching at the rigging with his claws. Rhaegal let out a frightened roar, vanishing into the sheets of rain. Viserion nearly tumbled into a wave, only to push himself upward again in a desperate flap of wings. Daenerys's heart pounded with fear for them. The savage tumult hammered the fleet for hours, and she wondered if it was some omen. Had the sea chosen to punish her for her defiance of the old ways? When at last the storm began to abate, the sky still churned with swirling gray clouds, but the torrents of rain slowed to a heavy drizzle. The sailors set about assessing the damage, counting the battered sails and checking for leaks in the hull. Some ships had been driven off course, drifting in the gloom, and Daenerys hoped they would find their way back to the main group by dawn. She was grateful beyond measure that the vessel carrying most of her dragon's supply of food had not been lost. One small galley, the Sea Falcon, was rumored to have taken on water until the crew jettisoned some cargo. No men had drowned, to her relief, though several were injured and a few horses had broken legs in their panic, forcing the Dothraki to end their suffering swiftly. The men did so grimly and without complaint, though Daenerys saw the pain in their eyes. In the sickly light before sunrise, Daenerys stood on the drenched deck, her hair plastered to her scalp. The sky above was a swirl of broken cloud. Her cloak smelled of salt and wet leather. Nearby, Ser Jorah pressed a cup of watered wine into her hand, which she accepted gratefully. She could taste the bitterness of it, but it soothed her nerves. Rakaro approached, water dripping from his braids, and bowed. "Khaleesi," he said in Dothraki, "the horses cry for land." "They shall have it soon," Daenerys murmured. "A few more days, and we will reach the shore. Remind them that I share their hatred of this crossing, but it is for a purpose." Her eyes drifted to the horizon, searching for a glimpse of any vessel still straggling behind. One by one, more ships rejoined the fleet as the day brightened. Daenerys counted them anxiously. She had named each in her own mind, paying close attention to which carried how many Dothraki and how many horses. The final galley to appear was the Sea Falcon, battered and listing slightly, but still afloat. Relief washed over her. They had survived the storm intact, more or less. The next few days of sailing proved calmer, though the sea remained rougher than Daenerys would have liked. At last, near sunset on the 5th day, a lookout cried that he saw land ahead. The sailors scrambled to the rails, shading their eyes against the fading orange light, and the Dothraki, so sick of the ocean's rocking, let out whoops of joy tinged with desperation. Daenerys caught a glimpse of mountainous coastline through the haze. She realized they had reached the shores of Dorne, if their navigators had not erred. A subdued excitement began to simmer in her chest. Westeros, at long last. She had never set foot in this land of her ancestors, yet it felt like she was returning home in some strange, fateful way. Captain Morio, a Lysene man with flamboyant tattoos, approached Daenerys with a quick bow. "Your Grace, the approach to Sunspear's ports is still some miles south. We can put in near the Cape of the Broken Arm if we wish to anchor, but it may be best to sail on into the night. If you want to land discreetly, we might find a smaller cove." She considered. A formal landing at Sunspear, seat of House Martell, might be the wise diplomatic choice. But would the Martells receive her openly? She did not know Prince Doran's mind, only that he might harbor old resentments about Elaya's murder. Perhaps he would welcome the last Targaryen. Perhaps he would see her as a threat, or might already be in quiet alliance with another rival. One rumor said that the Martells were uncertain about this rumored Aegon Targaryen. Another rumor claimed they supported him behind closed doors. Daenerys hated to rely on rumor, but she had little else. "Anchor in a secluded spot," she told Captain Morio. "I will decide on the morrow whether we attempt formal contact with House Martell." For now, let us land the horses, for they have suffered enough." Captain Morio signaled to the other ships by means of colored lanterns. The fleet altered course, hugging the coast. Daenerys could smell the wind coming off Westeros. Cooler, tinged with pine and the faint promise of a land she had never known. As dusk settled, they found a small cove sheltered by tall cliffs. The waters were calm enough to lower rowboats and ferry men and animals to the beach. Dothraki poured onto the sand, some collapsing to their knees and kissing the ground, praising the great stallion for preserving them. The horses stumbled off the boats, wide-eyed and trembling, but soon found fresh footholds and whinnied with relief. Daenerys disembarked last, stepping barefoot into the surf. She felt the coarse grains of sand under her toes and let out a shaky breath. She was in Westeros. The small cove was bordered by rugged cliffs that loomed overhead, dotted with scraggly bushes and sparse clumps of grass. A few narrow paths appeared to lead upward. As Daenerys moved inland, she could see a flatter expanse beyond the cliffs. The Dothraki brought torches, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the ground. Under starlight, they set up a makeshift camp. The horses grazed on rough shrubs, snorting at the strange taste. Daenerys had scouts gather driftwood for fires. Ser Jorah, Rakaro, and Barristan, still sometimes called Arstan by the others, convened with her to discuss their next step. They sat by the largest fire, which crackled in the midnight air. Drogon, drawn by the light, circled overhead, then landed on a nearby rock outcropping. His eyes gleamed orange in the reflection of the flames. Viserion and Regal soared in lazy arcs, occasionally letting out low rumbles. Daenerys absently stroked her damp hair. The crossing had exhausted her, and she felt a dull ache in every muscle, but her mind hummed with possibilities. This was the land she had dreamed of, the place she intended to rule. Yet she had never seen it except in old stories told by her brother or whispered by those who had fled with them years ago. Ser Jorah, his beard still salted with spray, gave her a small nod. "We have options, Your Grace. We could send an envoy to Sunspear, requesting an audience with Prince Doran Martell. If he is friendly, he might pledge Dorne to your cause. Or we could try to keep our presence hidden a while longer, gather more intelligence, see if the rumored Aegon has reached out to the Dornish. Or, if you wish to be bold, we could ride inland, show your dragons, and demand loyalty. Though that last approach is risky." Daenerys looked into the fire, recalling the harsh lessons she had learned in Essos. Conquest was never simple, especially in a land with so many factions and rivalries. She wanted to be recognized as a queen, but she also wanted to avoid repeating the worst mistakes of Targaryen rule. Still, she had no intention of skulking like a beggar. "I think we should attempt a diplomatic overture," she said. "But first, let us learn what we can about the current mood in Dorne. We need to know whether Prince Doran supports Aegon, or if he is open to another Targaryen claim." Rakaro, who had been silent, tapped his Araka's blade thoughtfully against the ground. "Khaleesi, the horses must run. They cannot remain cramped in this cove. Let us ride out tomorrow, see what land there is to see." Daenerys smiled gently. Rakaro was at once simpler and more perceptive than men gave him credit for. "We will do as you say. We will send small scouting parties to the roads, to see who travels these parts, to listen for gossip in villages if there are any near. But we must go carefully. We are not in the Dothraki Sea now. These people have their lords, their laws, and their own swords." Barristan dipped his head in agreement, lines of concern etched in his weathered face. "They might greet us as liberators or brand us invaders. Some might see you as a rightful queen, others as a threat to the balance of power. The Martells have reason to resent King's Landing for past atrocities. That may play to your advantage, Your Grace." She thought of Elia Martell, who had died so cruelly, and her children, Rhaenys and Aegon, who were supposed to have died as well. Now rumors spoke of a living Aegon, grown to manhood. The possibility that the Martells might already be allied with him made her uneasy. Would they spurn her if they believed their kinsman's child was the true Targaryen heir? For the rest of the night, Daenerys dozed in fits and starts near the fire, her mind churning with half-formed fears. Whenever she drifted off, she dreamed of walking through a great labyrinth of sun-scorched stone corridors, searching for a hidden door that would lead her to the throne room. She heard dragons roaring behind the walls but could not find a way to free them. When she finally snapped awake near dawn, covered in a thin film of sweat and sea salt, she found that the wind had stilled, leaving the cove wrapped in an eerie hush. Even the waves seemed subdued, lapping gently at the shore. She rose, brushed sand from her clothes, and looked around. The Dothraki were stirring. Some had climbed a narrow trail up the cliff to look for vantage points. Others busied themselves rubbing down the horses, checking hooves for damage. The ship captains had anchored their vessels just offshore for the night, and now she saw rowboats ferrying supplies and more men to the beach. Off to one side, her dragons sprawled on the warm sand, soaking in the sunlight that now crept over the cliff tops, painting the world in gold and pale pink. Daenerys ordered a small breakfast, mostly dried figs, hard bread, and a bit of salted fish, and then set out with an escort of 20 Dothraki, along with Ser Jorah and Barristan. Ricardo took the lead, guiding them up the narrow path that zigzagged along the cliff face. When they emerged atop the plateau, a view of rolling hills opened before them, dotted here and there with stands of scrubby pine and twisted olive trees. They could see no major road from their vantage point, but they spotted a faint trail winding down a slope. The air here smelled different from Essos, fresher, with a faint tang of desert dryness, but also an undercurrent of orchard blossoms that teased Daenerys' nose. They rode carefully, the horses relieved to be on solid ground. The Dothraki no longer looked green around the gills, but they were still edgy in this unfamiliar terrain. Each man held his arak loosely, scanning the horizon as though expecting ambush. Ser Jorah wore his sword on his hip, and Barristan carried a staff that concealed a blade, his disguised weapon useful for a supposed squire. Daenerys, too, felt a coil of tension. She had no illusions that her landing would go unnoticed for long. After an hour's ride, they saw the remains of a small tower, half broken and covered in creeping vines, probably an old watchtower that had fallen into disuse. They dismounted to explore, finding no sign of recent habitation. The stones were worn, the interior strewn with debris. Daenerys surveyed the land from the top of what remained of the tower's steps, shading her eyes against the sun. To the south, hills rolled down toward the glitter of the sea. To the north, the land rose gently, and she thought she saw the faint outline of a fortress perched on a distant ridge. Barristan joined her, stepping gingerly on the crumbling masonry. "That fortress is likely the seat of some minor Dornish lord," he murmured. "I do not recognize its shape, but my memory of these parts is not perfect." "How many lords hold land in Dorne?" Daenerys asked quietly, remembering the complicated feudal tapestry of Westeros that she had tried to study from afar. "Many," Barristan said, "but they all owe allegiance to House Martell and Sunspear, or so it is widely believed. Some may have more complicated loyalties, though, especially now. If word spreads that a Targaryen has landed, each will have to decide whether to stand with you, with the Iron Throne, or with this Aegon, should he prove genuine." Daenerys' gaze lingered on the distant fortress. "Then we must make a strong first impression. If we can persuade even one local lord to welcome me, it might ripple outward." They remounted, heading north. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them. The Dothraki, used to heat, hardly complained, but Daenerys could feel sweat trickling down her neck. Now and again, Ricardo spotted faint trails indicating that riders had passed here within the last week. They saw old horse droppings, bits of footprints. Yet the land seemed largely empty, a stark dryness reminiscent of certain edges of Essos. Toward midday, they spotted a shepherd boy perched on a rock, tending a small flock of goats. The moment he saw them, his eyes went wide, and he scrambled to his feet. Without waiting to see if they meant peace, he seized a scrawny donkey's reins and bolted across the hills, the goats scattering. Ricardo gave a snort of laughter. "They run like mice before the hawk." Daenerys felt a pang of sympathy. "He doesn't know us. To him, we must look like raiders from beyond the sea." Her group pressed on, occasionally passing stands of cactus-like plants or thorny bushes. The horses trod warily on the uneven ground, stones clattering under their hooves. At last, they came upon an actual road, a narrow, dusty track that cut between two ridges. Fresh wheel ruts indicated traffic. Daenerys raised a hand, and the party halted. She sent out 2 of her best scouts, Dothraki who could blend easily if they stayed low, to see if anyone traveled the road ahead. The rest waited, horses shifting impatiently. Within half an hour, the scouts returned, reporting that they had spotted a merchant's wagon a short distance away, accompanied by a pair of armed guards. "They move slowly," said one scout in the Dothraki tongue. "Shall we take them, Dean?" Aerys caught the eagerness in his voice. The old Dothraki ways flared. She shook her head. "We are not here to raid. I will speak to them if they're willing." They rode forward until they saw the wagon, a simple wooden cart piled with barrels. The 2 guards, wearing dusty leather jerkins and carrying spears, froze at the sight of so many mounted warriors. The merchant, a wiry man with sun-baked skin, scrambled from the driver's seat. "7 save us," he sputtered. "Who are?" His eyes widened in alarm at the sight of Daenerys with her silver-gold hair, flanked by these strange warriors. Daenerys dismounted and raised her hand in what she hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "I mean you no harm. I wish to purchase information, if you will sell it." The merchant swallowed, eyeing the Dothraki nervously. Yora stepped forward in a posture of quiet strength, one hand resting on his sword hilt. Barristan remained slightly behind Daenerys, his watchful gaze ready for any sign of treachery. The merchant licked his lips. What sort of information?" Daenerys kept her voice soft. "News of Dorne, news of House Martell, and rumors from the Stormlands. Have you heard of a boy claiming to be Prince Aegon Targaryen?" At her words, the guards exchanged startled glances. One guard, a tall man with a sun-scorched face, answered in a low tone. "It's said that the Golden Company landed in the Stormlands, yes, and that they seized Storm's End in the name of Prince Aegon. Folks say he is Rhaegar's son, saved from King's Landing all those years ago." He looked uncertain. "But we only know the talk you hear on the roads. Some say House Martell has sworn to uphold that claim, or will do so soon." Daenerys's mouth went dry. "Has Prince Doran Martell declared for him?" "No open declaration that we know of," the guard said. "Sunspear keeps its counsel as ever. But if the rumors are true, Dorne might well unite behind the blood of Elia Martell. Many here still remember her murder at the hands of the Lannisters." She digested that carefully. "Then you believe Dorne will fight against the Iron Throne?" The merchant hesitated. "Prince Doran is cautious. He lost family to the Lannisters before. But if this Aegon truly is Elia's son, we in Dorne have cause to see him ascend. That is the rumor, anyway." Daenerys felt a twist in her stomach. So it was as she feared. If the Martells recognized that boy as Elia's rightful heir, where did that leave Daenerys, the sister of Rhaegar, who believed herself the last Targaryen? Would they see her as competition? Or could they be convinced that 2 Targaryens were stronger together? She needed to be certain of how Prince Doran would react to her arrival. She offered the merchant a small pouch of coins, some from Yunkai, others minted in pentos. "Thank you for your words. If you know anything else, or have heard anything about Lannister forces in Dorne, speak now." The merchant's eyes lit up at the sight of coin. He scratched his chin. "We have heard no sign of the Lannisters marching into Dorne. The war is said to rage mostly in the Crownlands and the Reach. Perhaps some skirmishes near the Stormlands border. That is all I know, my lady. May the 7 bless you." He looked at her uncertainly, as if not entirely sure what title to give her. Daenerys nodded. "Your help is appreciated." She turned back to her blood riders, mounting her silver mare. "Leave them in peace," she said, and then urged her horse forward. They rode a few miles more along the dusty road until it crested a rise. Below, they saw a scattering of sun-baked farms, small orchards of fig trees, and a winding stream that cut through the land. That distant fortress rose more clearly now, a collection of sand-colored towers perched on the crest of a ridge. Daenerys paused, gazing at it. She suspected it belonged to a lesser branch of House Euler or House Jourdain, or perhaps some minor banner house of House Martell. She wondered if they should approach and request hospitality, or remain hidden. The risk was clear. If this minor lord was loyal to Prince Doran, and by extension to Aegon, Daenerys might be taken as an unwelcome intruder. Yet open communication might yield a better path than skulking about. Ser Jorah seemed to sense her thoughts. He reined in beside her. They may inform Sunspear of your presence regardless. If you wish a direct approach, we should do so soon. Otherwise, we risk them sending word of a strange Khalasar in secret, coloring Prince Doran's view. Daenerys inhaled slowly. I will not hide like a thief. We have come openly to seek alliances. Let this minor lord see who I am, and if he decides to treat me with suspicion, we'll know soon enough. She glanced at Barristan, who inclined his head in agreement, though his face was solemn. So they descended toward the fortress. The road remained empty, aside from a pair of peasants who fled into a grove of trees at the sight of so many horsemen. As they drew nearer, they passed farmland that seemed modestly prosperous. Scattered fields of Dornish peppers, date palms growing around a small oasis, a cluster of huts with thatched roofs. The sun climbed toward noon, making the fields shimmer with heat. Daenerys's Dothraki were used to dryness, but they sniffed the air warily. They had never seen quite this terrain before, mountainous ridges combined with desert scrub. The men scanned the high ground for hidden archers or watchers. At last, they came to the fortress gates, a wooden portcullis flanked by tall, sun-blasted walls. 2 guards in light armor stood watch, carrying spears. They stiffened, eyes darting from the silver-haired woman at the front to the heavily armed warriors behind her. Daenerys raised her hand in greeting. I am Daenerys Targaryen, she said, her voice carrying. I come in peace to request parley with your lord. Will you grant me entry? The guards exchanged a stunned look. One stammered, Targaryen? But we, wait here. He vanished inside, presumably to alert the castle. The other guard, a younger man, stared openly at Daenerys's hair and at her foreign garb. She wore a vest of soft leather dyed in pale colors, breeches suitable for riding, and carried no visible weapon. Minutes later, the guard returned, accompanied by an older knight wearing a simple surcoat emblazoned with a small sigil Daenerys did not recognize. A coiled serpent biting its own tail, perhaps. The man surveyed them, his weathered face giving away little. I am Ser Mandon of House Leicester, sworn to Lord Jourdain, he said curtly. You claim you are Daenerys Targaryen? She inclined her head. I do. I am the sister of Prince Rhaegar, the daughter of King Aerys II. I have come to Westeros to claim my birthright, but I seek to do so with allies, not with wanton bloodshed. The knight's eyes flicked over her Dothraki, lingering on the araks and leathery vests. You've come with savages, it seems, and yet you speak of peace. They are my people, Daenerys said sharply. They are not savages, only different from you. We've traveled across the sea, which should speak to our determination. Will you bring us to your lord, or must we remain outside? The knight hesitated. I cannot grant so many entry. My lord's hall is small, but you and a few others may come inside. The rest must wait beyond these walls. He looked at Jorah and Barristan uncertainly. Daenerys considered. It was a precarious position. If she entered with too few men, she risked being taken hostage if the local lord was hostile. If she refused, she might lose a chance to make a crucial ally. After a moment, she dismounted and handed her reins to Ricardo. Very well. I will bring Ser Jorah and one of my blood riders. The rest shall remain outside. But I assure you, if any harm befalls me, my dragons will know. She heard the rumble of wings overhead. Drogon was out there, perhaps circling. Ser Mandon frowned. Dragons? We have heard rumors. He stepped aside, gesturing. Come then, but see that your men remain calm. She turned to Ricardo, speaking quickly in Dothraki. Stay alert. If more men appear on the walls, do not fear. But if you sense a trap, She pressed her lips together. "Protect yourselves and send word to the ships." Ricardo placed his fist over his heart. "Blood of my blood, I will watch." She left Barristan with the rest, deciding that one white-haired Westerosi man posing as a squire might draw suspicion. Better to bring Ser Jorah, whose loyalty she trusted beyond doubt, though she knew well the complicated path that had once brought him into her service. Perhaps in Westeros, where he had been exiled, his presence might cause friction. She had no choice, though. She wanted Jorah's counsel at her side. They entered under the portcullis, boots echoing on worn stone. The courtyard beyond was modest, with a central well and a few small buildings. Archers stood on the walls, eyeing them warily. Ser Mandon led them into the great hall, which was more of a large chamber of rough stone with a high wooden roof. Light streamed in through narrow windows. At the far end, on a simple wooden seat, sat a man in his 50s, tall and spare, with a trimmed beard going gray at the edges. He wore clothing suited to the heat of Dorne, a light tunic in earthy tones, belted at the waist, a short mantle draped across one shoulder, pinned with a brooch that bore the same coiled serpent sigil. Daenerys approached, her posture poised. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she maintained composure. This was her first direct meeting with a Westerosi lord since she was a child. She remembered the lessons she had gleaned from her brief time among the merchant princes of Essos. Show courtesy, but do not appear weak. The man rose from his seat. "I am Lord Garland Jourdain," he said in a measured voice. "I have heard a name that I never expected to hear again in Dorne. Targaryen. My men say you claim to be Daenerys Stormborn." "I am," she replied. "I was born on Dragonstone during a great storm. My father was King Aerys II, my brother Prince Rhaegar. I come now to Westeros to reclaim the throne that was taken from my house." Lord Jourdain studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "So the rumors of your survival were true. The last Targaryen. We've heard stories of a woman with 3 dragons in Essos, but we also hear of another Targaryen, a boy calling himself Aegon." Daenerys inclined her head. "Yes, I have heard the rumors too. They say he is my nephew, Rhaegar's son. If that is true, I would rejoice, for it means our family did not perish entirely. Yet I know not if he truly is who he claims. I have come to Dorne, in part, to learn more." Lord Jourdain's gaze flicked to Ser Jorah, then to Daenerys's face. "And to seek allies, no doubt. You choose Dorne because of the ties between House Martell and Elia Targaryen, or rather Elia Martell, who wed Rhaegar. Dorne has long memories, but that does not mean we would blindly follow a Targaryen again. Too much blood has been spilled." Daenerys kept her voice gentle. "I do not ask for blind loyalty, my lord, only for the chance to speak with Prince Doran and make my case. The Lannisters have done Dorne grievous wrong. Surely you have no love for them. The Iron Throne sits in the hands of those who murdered Elia. If this Aegon is real and you choose to support him, that is your right. But if he is not what he claims, I would offer a true Targaryen cause, one that might see those crimes avenged." He stroked his beard. "Bold words. Yet you come with a band of savage riders, do you not? And rumors say you took gold from the slavers of Yunkai, that you turned your back on Astapor. Some might see that as hypocrisy. You claim justice, but what of the slaves still in chains overseas?" Her heart tightened. That question stung, for it touched the regret she carried. "I did what I had to in order to reach this shore. My intentions remain to bring a better rule, not cruelty. But I cannot free every slave city with the meager resources I possess. My first duty is here to Westeros, and to setting right the wrongs done to my house. Yet I have not forgotten those who suffer. Once I am queen, I can influence Essos as well." Lord Jourdain said nothing for a time, only pacing a few steps, his hand resting on the hilt of a slender sword at his belt. Then, at length, he gestured for her to sit on a cushioned bench. Ser Mandon and Ser Jorah hovered nearby, each watchful. Jourdain sank back into his seat. "You speak convincingly," he said. "Still, Dorne is not so easily swayed. We have not yet declared for this Aegon boy, but word is that the Martells are inclined to give him at least an audience. If Prince Doran believes he is truly Elia's son, many houses here would fall in line. That is our princess's child, after all. Daenerys nodded, controlling the swirl of anxiety in her gut. I understand. That is why I ask only for passage, and perhaps a chance to meet with Prince Doran myself. Let him judge between me and this boy. If he proves to be genuine, then we are kin, not enemies. If he is false, then House Martell might see the value of my presence. Jourdain drummed his fingers on the arm of his seat. You ask me to risk displeasing Prince Doran by openly harboring you, or guiding you to Sunspear. I ask you to do what you believe is right, she said softly. If that means providing guidance or safe conduct, or simply refusing to turn me away, you might inform Prince Doran of my arrival. He can make his own choice. I am not here to provoke a war in Dorne if I can avoid it. He regarded her for a while, and she felt a flicker of hope as his stern expression softened marginally. You speak like a queen, Daenerys Stormborn. Very well. I will not hinder you. I have no love for the Lannisters, that is certain. As for your nephew, if he is indeed your nephew, that remains to be seen. For my part, I have no official word from Prince Doran, so I cannot bar you from traveling onward. But I must warn you, if you march a foreign army through Dornish lands, there are many who will see it as a threat, no matter your intentions. The roads to Sunspear are not all open. Patrols might challenge you. Daenerys dipped her head in gratitude. I understand. We will proceed with caution, or else remain near the coast until we can send word to Sunspear. Perhaps you could aid us by sending a raven, telling Prince Doran I have come. He pursed his lips. I will do so, but the raven's message might be intercepted by eyes friendly to the Lannisters, or to that other Targaryen. If Prince Doran chooses to respond, it may take time. He paused, then added, For now, if you wish to camp in my lands, you may do so near the coast. My men will not harass you, provided your Khalasar does not pillage or harm my people. Daenerys suppressed a small smile of relief. You have my word. We will keep the peace. I shall pay for any goods we require in gold or trade. Thank you, my lord. Lord Jourdain inclined his head. Then we have an understanding. May the seven guide you, or whichever gods you name. With that, the audience ended. Daenerys withdrew with Ser Jorah and her blood rider, leaving Lord Jourdain's great hall behind. As they returned to the courtyard, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was not a grand alliance, but it was not outright rejection or arrest either. They remounted and rode beyond the gates. Outside, her Dothraki awaited with tense expressions. Ricardo was first to approach. We saw no sign of treachery, Khaleesi. Are we free to ride? She nodded. We have his leave to remain near the coast, so long as we do not raid his lands. He is sending word to Prince Doran. We must wait and see if the Prince of Dorne grants us an audience. Ricardo shrugged, as if to say waiting was not the Dothraki way, but he accepted her decision. The party turned their horses southward, returning toward the cove where the bulk of the Khalasar waited with the fleet. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Daenerys felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had placed her first foot in Westeros and found no immediate hostilities. That alone felt like a small victory. The next week passed in a tense kind of limbo. Daenerys established a more permanent camp a few miles south of the cove, near a small river that trickled down from the hills. Her ships remained anchored offshore, some of them rotating back and forth to gather fresh water or supplies. The Dothraki at least found enough grazing for the horses, though the grass was sparse compared to what they were used to. They itched for movement and conquest, but Daenerys held them back. She knew every step must be measured, lest she spark a conflict in Dorne without cause. Her greatest comfort in those days was the presence of her dragons, who roamed the skies above, sometimes venturing inland to hunt small game. They frightened local shepherds at first, but Daenerys sent word through Jourdain's men that the beasts would not harm them so long as they did not provoke attack. She wished her dragons could speak, for she felt she had so few true allies in this new land. At night, she pored over maps with Ser Jorah, Barristan, and her blood riders. The question loomed. Should they wait for a reply from Sunspear, or press forward to claim a foothold in Dorne, possibly seizing a minor port or castle? The latter plan risked antagonizing Prince Doran. The former left her vulnerable to the passage of time. She also worried about the rest of her forces back in Pentos, waiting for ships to return and ferry them across. If too many months passed, her presence in Dorne might become precarious, especially if the rumored Aegon advanced his cause in the Stormlands. Finally, on the 8th day since her arrival, a messenger appeared in their camp. He rode a lathered horse, escorted by a pair of Jourdain's men. The messenger bore the sun and spear sigil on his tunic, indicating allegiance to House Martell. Daenerys greeted him in her command tent, which was pitched near the river. The man bowed stiffly. "Khaleesi Daenerys Targaryen, I come bearing a letter from Prince Doran Martell of Sunspear. May I present it?" Daenerys's heart fluttered. "You may." She accepted the sealed parchment. The seal showed the sun and spear of Martell in bright wax. Carefully, she broke it open. The letter was written in a neat, flowing hand. To Daenerys Targaryen, called Stormborn, I have received Lord Jourdain's raven and have considered the news of your arrival with great interest. Dorne has its own concerns in these times of turmoil, but I am not blind to the history our two houses share. My sister Elia was wed to your brother, Prince Rhaegar, and our blood was mingled on that day. You come now to lay claim to the Iron Throne, yet another claimant also claims the name Targaryen and the blood of Elia Martell. As Prince of Dorne, I shall not deny a guest. If you wish to speak with me, come to Sunspear under a banner of peace. Bring a modest retinue, for my city cannot accommodate a vast army without notice. I would hear your words, and I would see the truth with my own eyes. I cannot guarantee any outcome, but promise you will have safe conduct in Dorne while we speak. Once our words are done, we shall see what path lies open to us both. Doran of House Martell, Prince of Dorne, Lord of Sunspear." Daenerys read it twice, her pulse quickening. She handed the letter to Ser Jorah so he might see for himself, then looked at the messenger. "Tell your prince that I accept his invitation and will come soon to Sunspear. I shall bring a small escort. My Khalasar will remain camped under Lord Jourdain's protection." The messenger bowed. "Prince Doran has extended his hospitality to you, but he entreats you not to march through Dorne with a large force. The roads are watched, and the common folk will be unsettled by so many foreign riders. Instead, he suggests you travel by ship around the coast to Sunspear's harbor, if that pleases you." Daenerys considered the request. It made sense that Doran would not want a Khalasar roaming the Dornish countryside, potentially alarming every lord in the region. "Very well. I will sail to Sunspear with a handful of my best men. The rest shall await my word here." Ser Jorah cleared his throat quietly, as though to voice a protest. She gave him a reassuring nod. She knew the risks. If Prince Doran proved hostile, or if his real loyalty lay with Aegon, she could be stepping into a trap. But she suspected Doran Martell was more subtle than that, a man who valued cunning over brute force. The messenger bowed again, relief evident on his face. "Then I shall return to Sunspear with your reply. Prince Doran will make preparations." Within a day, Daenerys selected the retinue she would take. Ser Jorah, Barristan, and 5 of her best blood riders, including Rakaro, Aggo, and Jogo, who had stood by her since Khal Drogo's Khalasar. She considered bringing her dragons, but they were hardly something she could confine to a city's harbor, and to let them roam free overhead might cause panic. In the end, she decided Drogon would accompany her by flight. He was the largest and least likely to be kept away. Rhaegal and Viserion would remain with the Khalasar. She felt a pang at separating them, but it might be for the best. If trouble arose, her men could unleash Rhaegal and Viserion, or fly them to Sunspear in turn. She boarded a smaller galley that same evening, leaving the bulk of her forces camped under Lord Jourdain's watchful eye. The Dothraki parted from her with a mixture of relief. They disliked being parted from their Khaleesi, and wariness at letting her go into unknown territory. But Daenerys reassured them with promises that she would send word soon, and that if any harm befell her, Drogon would carry the news back to them. The voyage from the cove to Sunspear was mercifully short, a day and a night hugging the coast. The weather remained calm, the sea a gentle roll beneath the vessel. Daenerys stood at the bow with Yora by her side, scanning the horizon for signs of the city. At dawn, they glimpsed the spires of Sunspear rising from the shore, pale and slender, crowned with domes that glinted in the morning sun. The city sprawled along the coastline, ringed by high walls that marched into the sea. Beyond the walls, she could see a cluster of towers known as the Spear Tower, the Tower of the Sun, and the Tower of the Sword, remnants of House Martell's long history. Her galley raised a white banner of truce alongside the Targaryen sigil, her three-headed dragon on a field of black, though she wondered if anyone in Sunspear would recognize the latter as a living claim, or if they would think it an echo of times long gone. On deck, Barristan gave her a solemn nod. "It has been many years since I set foot in Dorne, Your Grace, but the city looks much the same." They approached the harbor, which was guarded by a pair of stout towers. Dornish soldiers stood watch on the battlements. Daenerys sensed their eyes tracking the ship, especially when Drogon appeared overhead, casting a long shadow across the water. He roared once, making the gulls scatter, then circled higher. The watchers must have been astonished or terrified, but no arrows were loosed. Instead, a long horn sounded from the walls, a deep note echoing over the bay. Sailors guided the galley to a stone quay, where a small gathering awaited them. Daenerys disembarked gracefully, Ser Yora and her blood riders following. Barristan lingered near the gangplank. She immediately saw that among the group on the quay stood a tall, slender man with a carefully trimmed beard shot with silver. He wore robes of airy silk in Dornish style, the Martell sun and spear device embroidered at his breast. He rested his hands on the gilded arms of a wheeled chair. Clearly he had difficulty walking. Behind him stood several Dornish knights, and to his left was a woman with dark eyes and a proud tilt to her chin, dressed in a flowing orange gown. Daenerys recognized her from descriptions. Arianne Martell, the daughter of Prince Doran. The man spoke first, his voice mild, betraying only a hint of curiosity. "Welcome to Dorne, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen. I am Doran Martell, Prince of Sunspear. My house extends our hospitality to you. May this be a peaceful meeting." Daenerys inclined her head. "I thank you, Prince Doran. You do me honor by granting an audience. I come hoping to forge friendship between House Martell and House Targaryen, as once existed when your sister wed my brother." Prince Doran inclined his head in turn. His face was composed, yet Daenerys saw something akin to sadness flicker behind his dark eyes. "My sister's memory burns bright in Dorne, as does the memory of what befell her. Many have yearned for justice these many years." Daenerys felt the weight of that statement. "My lord, I yearn for justice as well. My family was torn asunder by usurpers and Lannister treachery. If we stand together, we can avenge Elia and restore House Targaryen to the throne." Arianne Martell stepped forward, her gaze searching Daenerys' face. "And what of my cousin? If the boy in the Stormlands truly is the son of Elia and Rhaegar, what place does he have in your plans?" Daenerys answered carefully, aware that each word could shift the balance. "If he is truly my nephew, then we share a bond of blood. I would welcome him as family, not an enemy. But I do not yet know if he is truly who he claims to be. I come here to learn the truth and to see if Dorne will help me discover it. If he is genuine, we might unite. If he is false, I would not see the Martells deceived." Arianne's dark eyes flashed with interest, though a guarded wariness lingered. Prince Doran gave a small nod. "It is true that we have heard many rumors. He calls himself Aegon Targaryen, and he is said to bear a striking resemblance to Prince Rhaegar in his youth. The Golden Company backs him, which lends credence, but sells words can be bought for gold. We in Dorne have remained watchful. Some houses clamor for us to declare for him at once. Others counsel caution, as is my wont." He paused. "I have not yet given my final word, though I have been in contact with certain emissaries from the Stormlands." Daenerys caught the nuance. Doran was stalling, perhaps, until he could be sure which Targaryen was the better bet, or if the boy was even real. She decided to step boldly. "If you permit it, Prince Doran, I would ask you send word to this Aegon and invite him to Dorne as well, that we might look each other in the eye and confirm if we share the same blood. If we do, we can decide how best to proceed. If not, the truth will out." Aerion glanced at her father, an almost imperceptible twitch of her brows. Daenerys understood it as a silent question. Dare we host both Targaryen claimants in the same place? The tension in the air was palpable. Yet Prince Doran gave a contemplative nod. "You propose an interesting notion, a meeting of Targaryens, or at least those who claim the name. It could be a moment for the history books, or it could spark further bloodshed." He steepled his hands together in his lap. "But I see the wisdom in it if the boy is willing. My daughter Aerion can write to his camp in the Stormlands, extend the invitation. If he refuses, that tells us something, does it not?" Daenerys felt a cautious relief. "Thank you, my prince. In the meantime, I shall remain as your guest, if that is your will." "It is," Doran said. "Sunspear is not so grand as the Red Keep, but we have enough rooms for you and your companions. Of course, your Khalasar must remain outside the city, or in the surrounding region, if they come. We cannot house thousands of riders within these walls." Daenerys gave a small smile, a little wry. "They remain near the coast, in the domain of Lord Jourdain. Most will stay there until I know my path forward." Prince Doran nodded in approval. "Then let us proceed. Aerion, would you escort our royal guest to the Tower of the Sun? I shall join you shortly." He paused, letting his gaze rest on Daenerys. "Know that I am a man of caution, yet not without sympathy. If your intentions are true, we may find much to discuss." So began Daenerys's uneasy sojourn in Sunspear. Over the next days, she walked the corridors of the Martell's ancestral seat, which were airy and filled with sunlight, overlooking courtyards of lemon trees and date palms. She spent hours conversing with Prince Doran, carefully unraveling the politics that gripped Westeros, from the uncertain King Tommen in King's Landing under the sway of the Lannisters, to the rumored conflicts with the Tyrells, to the aftermath of Robb Stark's downfall in the north. Dorne had largely been spared direct invasion so far, but the tension was palpable. Should Dorne choose a side, it might tip the balance of power. Aerion Martell proved gracious but guarded, testing Daenerys' convictions with pointed questions. She asked about the Dothraki, about the gold from Yunkai, about Daenerys' time in Qarth and Meereen. Daenerys gave measured answers, never lying outright but choosing her words to emphasize her desire for a just rule. She sensed Aerion's skepticism melting little by little, replaced by a spark of admiration. A woman forging her own destiny was not unheard of in Dorne, which followed its own inheritance customs. But still, Aerion needed proof that Daenerys' aims aligned with Martell interests. Ser Jorah and Barristan remained at her side, silent pillars of support. Occasionally, they sparred with Dornish knights in the practice yards, though the heat taxed them. Rakaro, Aggo, and Jogo roamed the walls restlessly, disliking the sense of being caged, as they put it, but obeying Daenerys' command not to cause trouble. Drogon made his presence known each morning, swooping over the city with a roar that rattled windows. The city guards grew accustomed to his shadow passing overhead, though many gazed up with unease and prayed that the Dragon Queen did not turn on them. On the fourth evening, a feast was prepared in Daenerys' honor, a formal occasion where the lords of lesser Dornish houses who resided in Sunspear gathered to see her. Wine flowed, spiced with local peppers, and platters of roasted peppers, grilled fish, and flatbreads filled the tables. Musicians played soft, lilting tunes under the glow of lanterns. Daenerys wore a gown of pale blue silk provided by Aerion, and she let her silver-gold hair cascade freely down her back. Prince Doran was carried in on his wheeled chair, flanked by his guards, and Aerion presided at his side. During the feast, Daenerys found herself fielding countless questions from curious Dornish lords who wanted to know about the dragons, about life across the sea, about her claim compared to this rumored Aegon. She answered politely, focusing on what might resonate with them. The ties of blood, the murder of Elia, the desire to see those who wronged Dorne brought to justice. She omitted certain details, like her regret in Astapor, her near liberation of the Unsullied. It no longer mattered. She was here now with only the Khalasar behind her. The choices had been made. As the feast wound down, Aerion approached with a subtle smile and drew Daenerys aside to a private alcove. The flicker of torchlight played across Aerion's features, revealing a thoughtful expression. "I have sent a raven to the Stormlands," she said softly. "To the camp of the Golden Company. I invited Prince Aegon to Sunspear, if he so desires an audience with my father. I made it clear that another Targaryen, his supposed aunt, is here." Daenerys's heartbeat quickened. "Thank you," she said. "Do you think he will come?" Aerion shrugged gracefully. "If he truly is who he claims, and if he wishes to unite with Dorne, he may. But the Golden Company might counsel him otherwise. There is a risk in placing himself in your vicinity if the two of you are rivals. Still, my father believes that if he truly is Rhaegar's son, he has no reason to fear his own blood." Daenerys nodded, though her thoughts swirled. If the boy arrived and turned out to be an imposter, how would that confrontation play out? If he was genuine, she might have to relinquish her place in the line of succession, or else persuade him to share power. She recalled the old Targaryen tradition of multiple heads on the dragon, a notion that a wise ruler might adopt. Yet she had no experience of co-ruling a kingdom, and if they did unite, how would Westeros react? Aerion seemed to sense her turmoil. "Be patient, Daenerys Stormborn. My father can be patient for years at a time if need be. He will not rush a decision, but that does not mean he is idle. Dorne's loyalty is a valuable prize, and we weigh carefully whom we give it to. All I can say is that you have not displeased us. You have shown courtesy, intelligence, and sincerity. That counts for much." Daenerys offered a tentative smile. "I am grateful for your hospitality. I only hope I can prove to you that I would make a worthy ally." They parted with a polite nod. Daenerys wandered onto a balcony overlooking the city, the warm night air wrapping around her. Below, she saw the flicker of countless lanterns, heard the distant hum of voices and laughter from the feast. In the harbor, the galley that had carried her here rocked gently, sails furled. Somewhere in the sky above, Drogon drifted on warm updrafts, watchful. She closed her eyes, recalling the moment she had stepped off the ship and set foot in Westeros. So much of her life had led here, yet the future remained uncertain. Days stretched into weeks. Word arrived from various corners of Westeros. King Tommen still sat the Iron Throne under the guidance of Queen Regent Cersei and the Tyrells. The Crown's armies had been tested by skirmishes with rebellious lords in the Riverlands, still reeling from the Red Wedding and House Frey's ascendancy. In the Stormlands, so said the Ravens, Prince Aegon gained more supporters each passing week, swelling the Golden Company's ranks with local bannermen who remembered Rhaegar fondly. Rumor even spoke of some lords in the Reach quietly sending feelers to Aegon. If Dorne officially joined him, the Stormlands and Dorne united might provide a direct path to King's Landing. Daenerys read these reports with growing concern. She could feel the tide of time pressing her. Prince Doran, wise though he was, proved maddeningly patient. He listened to her arguments, politely probed her intentions, and never let slip which way he was leaning. Aerion grew friendlier toward Daenerys, even showing her the water gardens, a lovely retreat where fountains and mosaic pools shimmered under the sun. Yet no firm alliance was declared. The letter inviting Prince Aegon to Sunspear went unanswered for many days, fueling speculation that he might not trust the Martells enough to risk traveling south. Or perhaps messages were being intercepted, or perhaps his advisors preferred he remain in the Stormlands, consolidating strength. Meanwhile, Daenerys's Khalasar waited anxiously in the coastal camp. Reports trickled in that some minor Dornish lords eyed them with suspicion. There were a few incidents of stolen livestock, Dothraki raiders testing the edges of Daenerys's restraint, but Ricardo ensured restitution was made. All of it felt precarious, a balancing act. She sometimes wondered if she should have marched straight to King's Landing or claimed a fortress by force, but she knew she lacked the numbers for a direct assault on the Iron Throne. The Dothraki were fearsome riders, but discipline was not their strength, nor did they excel at sieges. She needed allies, or she needed her dragons to be large enough to break open city gates. She had neither advantage yet. So she waited, a reluctant guest in a land that was half hers and half alien. At last, a raven arrived from the Stormlands, carrying a sealed parchment marked with a three-headed dragon sigil in gold ink. This time, Arryn brought the letter to Daenerys personally, her face bright with suppressed excitement. They unrolled it in Prince Doran's solar, with the prince seated behind his wide desk, Yora and Barristan standing at Daenerys' sides. It read, "To Prince Doran Martell of Sunspear, I have received your invitation with gratitude. If you truly host my aunt, Daenerys Targaryen, I would be pleased to meet her in Dorne, that we might discuss matters of blood and birthright. I come in good faith, accompanied by my trusted advisors and a detachment of the Golden Company. Let no harm befall me or my men, and I vow the same courtesy to you. If my aunt is indeed Daenerys Stormborn, sister to my late father, then we have much to discuss. Aegon Targaryen, the sixth of his name, Prince of the Seven Kingdoms." Daenerys' fingers trembled slightly around the parchment. So he claimed to be the sixth Aegon, discounting her father's reign as the second Aerys. Her mind spun with questions. Was this truly the babe who had been thought murdered? So how had he survived? Would she look into his eyes and see her brother's ghost? Or was he just a pretender propped up by the Golden Company's lust for a Targaryen restoration? Prince Doran exhaled, rolling his chair back slightly. He means to come, it seems. This is an extraordinary moment. If the last two Targaryens meet in my halls, what might follow? Peace, war, an alliance that topples the Lannisters? Or another dance of dragons? The reference to a dance of dragons made Daenerys' blood run cold. She recalled the tales of the Targaryen civil war generations ago, when rival claimants destroyed much of their house. She would not let that happen again. Not if this boy was truly Rhaegar's son. "I desire no civil war," she said quietly. "If he is of my blood, we must find a way to stand together, or else discover if some trick is at play." Arryn reached out to touch Daenerys' hand briefly. "Then we must ensure the meeting is handled with utmost caution. My father will see that both parties are guarded, but not threatened. It will be in Sunspear, in the Tower of the Sun, perhaps. Neutral ground, with no hidden crossbows, no ambush." Yora spoke for the first time. "We should have a plan if this Aegon proves hostile, Your Grace. The Golden Company is large and well-trained. They have elephants, archers, siege engineers. A bold attempt at capturing Sunspear could be made if they plan treachery." Prince Doran gave him a measured look. "We know how to defend our city, Ser Yora, and we will not open the gates to a massive host. Only a small retinue will be permitted. The rest must camp outside the walls. If your nephew truly desires peace, he will abide by that restriction." Daenerys nodded, relief loosening the knot in her chest. "Then let us prepare. If he comes by ship or by land, we should be ready to receive him. And I will have Drogon near, if only to discourage illusions of violence." So the Martells sent their reply, and the preparations began. Daenerys hardly slept those next few nights. She walked the palace corridors, imagining every possibility. If the boy was an impostor, she might have to expose him, which could drive a wedge between her and Dorne if they believed his story. If he was genuine, he might have a stronger claim than she, as the direct son of Rhaegar. Would he demand she bend the knee, or would he welcome her as queen in her own right, forging a joint rule? She thought of the Targaryen tradition of multiple heads on the dragon, yet also recalled the many tragedies that had befallen such arrangements. On a sultry afternoon, she stood on a rooftop terrace with Arryn, gazing at the sea. Far off on the horizon, sails appeared. The Golden Company's ships, or so the watchers reported. A portion of the company was approaching by sea, perhaps a handful of vessels. Others might march around by land. Prince Doran had commanded that only a few hundred men would be permitted near the city. The rest must remain at a distance. Daenerys placed her trust in Martell's skillful political balancing act. She dreaded the possibility of a double-cross, but the Martells would not lightly invite chaos into their own domain. By twilight, Daenerys waited in the courtyard outside the Tower of the Sun, robed in a gown of black and red, the Targaryen colors. A small escort of Dornish guards flanked her, with Yora and Barristan behind. Ricardo and the other Blood Riders remained further back, uneasy at the idea of letting a potential threat so close to their Khaleesi. Prince Doran's retinue stood on one side, Prince Trystane included, a boy of about 10 and half-brother to Aerion. The gates creaked open. In marched a column of men wearing the black and gold livery of the Golden Company. Their armor was well cared for, their banners bearing the skull and gold coins symbol so infamous across Essos. Elephants had been left outside the walls, for none would fit easily in these streets. Daenerys counted perhaps 50 men, heavily armed but disciplined. At their head walked a young man clad in gleaming plate, the three-headed dragon of Targaryen over the sigil of the Golden Company. He was tall, with silver-gold hair cut short, his face smooth and youthful, perhaps 17 or 18. At his side walked a few older men, likely captains or knights. The young man's eyes fixed on Daenerys the moment he entered the courtyard, and in that instant, she felt her heart lurch. He did look eerily like Rhaegar from the portraits she remembered. The high cheekbones, the deep purple eyes, the tilt of the chin. A hush fell over everyone present. Daenerys's pulse pounded in her ears. Could this truly be her nephew? She felt a wave of emotion threatening to spill over. Hope, fear, suspicion, longing. She bowed her head slightly in greeting. Prince Aegon. He inclined his head, his expression composed. Aunt Daenerys, it honors me to meet you at last. His voice trembled just enough to betray that he, too, felt the gravity of this moment. He stepped forward until only a few paces separated them, ignoring the tension of guards and watchers all around. I have dreamt of this day since I learned who I was. To stand before the only other living Targaryen, my father's sister. She found her voice, though it felt strained. I never thought my nephew survived. We believed that the mountain killed you in King's Landing, that there was no heir left of Rhaegar's line. His gaze flickered with pain. They killed another child in my place, Aunt. A sickening cruelty. I was spirited away across the narrow sea, raised in secret, taught by those loyal to my father's memory. Only now have I returned to claim what was stolen from us. She studied him closely, searching for signs of deception. Yet everything in his posture, his features, his voice, mirrored what she might expect of a Targaryen prince. The older man at his side, a grizzled knight with a scar across one cheek, bowed. Your Grace, I am Jon Connington, once hand of the king to Prince Rhaegar. It was I who failed him at the Battle of the Bells. I have devoted my life to protecting his son, to atoning for my failures. Daenerys recognized the name from her brother Viserys' bitter recollections. Lord Jon Connington had been disgraced by King Aerys for losing a key battle. She had believed him long dead, but here he stood, alive and full of determination. Barristan, behind her, inhaled sharply, no doubt recognizing Connington's face. The hush stretched long. Prince Doran and his household watched from the perimeter, silent. At last, Daenerys forced a trembling smile. If you are truly Rhaegar's son, then we share blood, and I would not make war upon my own blood. I have come to Westeros with a Khalasar. I will not deny it, but I came seeking allies, not to burn or pillage. Aegon took another step, searching her face. Then let us not be enemies. I know some say you claim the throne for yourself, but if you would stand beside me, Aunt, stand as my queen or my regent. Together we can uproot the Lannisters and free the realm from their grasp. She felt the words like a blow. Her dream had always been to be the queen in her own right, not the consort or regent to another. Yet if he was the rightful heir, she had to consider the old laws of succession. Could she stand behind him? A swirl of pride, doubt, and curiosity spun within her. Could they rule together, co-equal, each ahead of the dragon? Or would that sow confusion among the lords of Westeros? Aegon seemed to sense her hesitation. His voice softened. I have not come to usurp you, Aunt. We are Targaryens both. Our house has been shattered enough by false kings and betrayals. Let us heal it. There is room for 2 dragons on the field, if we so choose. Daenerys breathed in, glancing at Prince Doran, who watched with careful neutrality, though she sensed hope in his eyes. She turned back to Aegon. I would gladly see the realm freed of Lannister rule, and the memory of Elia Martell avenged. But I must know the truth of you. Are you truly Aegon? I see Rhaegar's face in yours, but that alone cannot prove your blood. Jon Connington spoke up again, his voice firm. We have proof enough. Testimonies from those who knew the child, from Septon Maribald who performed blessings, from the wet nurse who fled with him. We carry relics from Rhaegar himself. But I also know that the surest proof lies in our words and our hearts. We do not seek to trick you. We wish for House Targaryen to reign once more. She let the words wash over her, though her skepticism lingered. Even so, she felt an odd stirring, almost like recognition. The boy's stance, the slight turn of his head, reminded her of her brother as she remembered him in childhood. A tear threatened to rise in her eye, but she blinked it away. Then let us speak further, in private if need be. We should not do this in front of half the city. Aegon nodded. I agree. Let us find an accord. If we can present a united front, the realm might flock to us. If we quarrel, we hand victory to the Lannisters on a platter. Prince Doran's voice rose from the sideline, calm and regal. Well spoken. Sunspear welcomes you both. Let us retire to a council chamber and see if 2 Targaryens can find common cause. I, for one, would be heartened to see that happen, for the sake of Elaya's memory and for the sake of Dorne. A hum of conversation spread among those gathered. Daenerys saw the men of the Golden Company exchange satisfied glances, as if this was going exactly to plan. She glanced at Yora, who offered a slight nod of reassurance. Barristan's face was grim but not hostile. Ricardo glowered from a distance, uncertain of these foreigners who called themselves Targaryen. The stage was set for an alliance or a schism that could change the fate of the 7 kingdoms. Over the next few days, Daenerys and Aegon conferred with Prince Doran in a series of long councils within the Tower of the Sun. Arryn joined as well, along with Yora, Barristan, and Jon Connington. The talks were painstaking, each side wary of traps. Aegon shared his story in more detail. How Varys had swapped him with another infant, how he had been raised across the sea under the watchful eye of Connington and a few trusted allies, how he had learned the arts of diplomacy and war, preparing for the day he would claim his birthright. Daenerys countered with the tale of her own survival. How she and Viserys had lived in exile, how she was sold to Khal Drogo, and how she had awakened 3 dragon eggs and become the mother of dragons. Aegon listened with evident wonder when she described the hatching of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Slowly, they tested each other's sincerity. Aegon asked why she had turned away from the Unsullied in Astapor. Did that not show weakness or indecision? Daenerys admitted she had not wanted to delve further into the ways of slavers to purchase an army, preferring the loyalty of the Dothraki and the power of her dragons. He pressed her on how large her dragons were and how quickly they might grow. She, in turn, asked about his readiness to face the Lannisters in open battle, how many men the Golden Company could truly field, and whether the Stormlands had fully rallied to him. Each question peeled back another layer of caution. Prince Doran, for his part, encouraged them to find a compromise. If both truly wanted House Targaryen restored, they would be stronger together. But what shape would that take? A marriage? A co-monarchy? One ruling and the other standing as their hand or prince consort. The idea of marrying her nephew, if indeed he was her nephew, gave Daenerys pause. Targaryen history was filled with such unions, but the prospect unsettled her on a personal level. Yet the realm might expect or accept that. She felt pulled in conflicting directions. As the negotiations wore on, Aegon revealed a streak of pride that reminded her of Rhaegar. He carried himself like a born prince, and at times it made her bristle, as she had carved her own path through blood and fire. She was not a timid princess to be overshadowed. Yet she also saw glimpses of humility, moments when he admitted fear or confusion about the burdens laid upon him. Those moments softened her. She wondered if perhaps they could indeed find a way to share the rule, each complementing the other's strengths. She had dragons and he had an army. She had cunning gleaned from the politics of Essos. He had the Golden Company's loyalty and a strong tie to Dorne. Together, they could march on King's Landing and cast out the Lannisters. One night, after a particularly grueling council, Aegon cornered her in a quiet corridor near a colonnade. A warm breeze wafted in from the gardens below, and torches guttered in the sconces. He studied her face in the flickering light, his voice hushed. "Aunt Daenerys," he said. "May I speak plainly?" She inclined her head. "Of course." He hesitated, then took a breath. "If we unite, nothing can stop us. The lords of Westeros will see the blood of the dragon in us both, and with Dorne behind us, the Stormlands at my back, and your Dothraki cavalry, the Iron Throne is within reach. I fear only that you might resent me for having a stronger claim by birth. I do not seek to diminish you. I was taught by those who revered my father and mother, and I know that House Targaryen needs more than one living member to thrive." Daenerys let out a trembling exhale. "I have dreamed of taking the throne my entire life, but if you are truly Aegon, your claim is indeed older than mine. I am torn between that truth and my own longing. Could we share the throne, in name and authority? The Targaryens once had more than one monarch. Or perhaps a marriage alliance, as Prince Doran hinted." She looked away, cheeks warming. "I know it is not so strange for Targaryens, yet it feels complicated." Aegon's gaze flickered. "Complicated, yes. I will not force you into any arrangement you find distasteful. I have never met you before now. But we must show unity, or the lords of Westeros will see cracks and exploit them. They will wonder which Targaryen to follow, and we cannot afford a new dance of dragons. Perhaps a betrothal, if not a wedding day set in stone." She swallowed. "We hardly know each other." He laughed softly, a sound that reminded her too much of Rhaegar. "That can be remedied if time allows, but at the least, let us stand before the people as a united House Targaryen. If we do so, the Martells might openly declare for us, the Golden Company's lords will be assured of your acceptance, and your Dothraki will have a firm purpose beyond simple pillage. Then King's Landing will tremble." Daenerys felt a swirl of dread and hope. She recalled how Khal Drogo had once promised her the Iron Throne, how she had lost him before that vow could be fulfilled. Now here stood a nephew she never knew she had, offering a chance to claim that throne without more Targaryen blood spilled. "I will consider it," she whispered. "Let us see what your men and my advisors say. If Prince Doran endorses this path, we could soon have an army that outmatches the Lannisters." In the days that followed, the plan solidified. Daenerys and Aegon would publicly declare themselves united as Targaryens, forging an alliance by blood and cause. They would present themselves as co-rulers, with the question of marriage left as a future possibility. Dorne would pledge its support, offering soldiers and supply lines. The Golden Company and Daenerys' Dothraki would combine their might. The final impetus to this union came when Daenerys summoned Drogon to alight in a courtyard, letting Aegon see him up close. The young prince was awestruck, as were his captains. No one could deny the power a dragon brought to the battlefield. Combined with the Golden Company's discipline, they would be formidable, perhaps unstoppable. Prince Doran, after much deliberation, agreed to put Dorne's strength behind them. He insisted on a formal ceremony in the Tower of the Sun, a symbolic gesture that House Martell recognized the return of House Targaryen. Lords and ladies of Dorne gathered, some still uncertain, some genuinely moved by the sight of two Targaryens in the flesh. Aegon wore armor in black and red. Daenerys wore a gown of silver with a red dragon motif. Prince Doran proclaimed them rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, citing Elaya's marriage to Rhaegar and the lineage of Aerys II. A murmuring hush spread through the hall, culminating in cheers from some corners, polite applause from others. Daenerys caught Aryane's eyes in the crowd and sensed the woman's approval. Beside her, Aegon projected a regal confidence. though Daenerys noticed a tremor in his hand when he clasped hers before the gathered watchers. She shared that tremor. So much was changing so quickly. She was forging a path where she did not stand alone, but with a nephew who might overshadow her or might strengthen her. She could not be certain which. That very evening, they began the logistics of mobilizing. The Golden Company had established a foothold in the Stormlands, but if Dorne was now fully allied, they could open another front. The plan was to bring Daenerys' Khalasar from the coast, unite them with a portion of Dornish forces, and march north. The rest of the Golden Company would converge from the Stormlands, either by land or sea. Meanwhile, Daenerys' dragons, Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal, would serve as a devastating asset, especially if the Lannisters dared to meet them in open battle. They knew well that the Targaryen scions had little love for those who had butchered Elia Martell and her children. Night fell, and Daenerys found herself on a balcony overlooking Sunspear, the dunes and the sea glowing faintly under the moonlight. The swirl of the day's ceremony still buzzed in her mind. She felt exhausted yet wired. A light footstep sounded behind her, and she turned to see Ser Jorah approaching. He bowed his head. "Your Grace, it has been a momentous day." She nodded, eyes drifting to the moon's reflection on the waves. "I did not expect to join forces with another Targaryen. I hardly believed it possible. Yet here we are." Jorah stepped closer, resting his hands on the stone balustrade. "You have gained allies. The Golden Company, the Martells, and perhaps more once word spreads that Dorne accepts you. That is no small feat. You stood alone with a Khalasar, and now you stand with an army that might rival King's Landing." She heard the unspoken question in his tone. "Do you doubt that he is truly Aegon?" Jorah exhaled. "Part of me wonders. But, looking at him, hearing him speak, it's hard to imagine a falsehood carried so convincingly. And Jon Connington is not known for gullibility. If it is a fraud, it is the greatest in living memory. But if it is true, you must reckon with the old laws of succession. Will men call him the rightful king and you the usurper?" Daenerys felt a pang. "Yes, I must reckon with that. But if we stand side by side, does it matter who has the older claim? We are family. We can share the throne in some manner, or so we keep telling ourselves. Still, part of me worries I may be overshadowed." Jorah's gaze gentled. "You have dragons, Your Grace. No Targaryen king or queen has had living dragons for more than a century. That alone sets you apart. No one who sees those beasts in battle will mistake who unleashed them." She managed a small smile. "Thank you, Jorah. I needed to hear that." He bowed again, the torchlight gilding his features with a warm glow. "I remain yours to command, always." When he had withdrawn, Daenerys stayed on the balcony, letting the breeze cool her cheeks. A marriage alliance. The thought flickered through her mind. She was not ignorant of Targaryen traditions, but something in her still recoiled from the idea of wedding a nephew, even if she had never met him until now. Yet, if that was the price of forging a stable claim, she might consider it. Or they might remain separate, each a monarch in name, though that could breed confusion and jealousies down the line. She sighed, wishing for the clarity of her dragon's simplicity. Drogon soared or dove, hunted or roared, without second-guessing each flight. Her own flight was tangled in centuries of custom, ambition, and conflicting loyalties. But she had come too far to falter. One way or another, the Iron Throne would see a Targaryen returned, and the Lannisters would pay for their crimes. Whether that Targaryen was named Aegon or Daenerys or both remained to be resolved. Word traveled fast through the realm. Within weeks, bannermen all across Dorne rallied, sending troops to gather near the border with the Stormlands. A trickle of lesser lords from the Reach sent envoys, curious about whether House Tyrell would remain bound to the Lannisters or if they might consider switching allegiance to the Targaryens. Rumors abounded that King Tommen's small council argued incessantly over how to handle the threat of two Targaryens uniting. Queen Cersei was said to be in a rage, calling Aegon a pretender and Daenerys a foreign invader. Daenerys rejoined her Khalasar, bringing them inland now that they had Dorne's blessing, though she kept them under strict discipline to avoid harming the local population. She introduced Aegon to Rakaro, Aggo, Jogo, and the rest, who regarded him with suspicious eyes but bowed grudgingly when Daenerys commanded it. Aegon in turn presented some of his Golden Company captains, men with hard faces, exiled knights, and free riders from Essos who had sworn to restore House Targaryen. Cunnington oversaw their discipline, while Barristan at times sparred with them, testing their skill. At last, the day came when they would march north. Prince Doran, constrained by gout, would remain in Sunspear, but he sent Arianne and a large contingent of Dornish cavalry to represent House Martell on the battlefield. Arianne rode at Aegon's side, a vision of Dornish pride in her flowing silks, but fully capable of wielding a whip or dagger. Daenerys rode with her blood riders, leading a wedge of Dothraki riders. The combined host was still smaller than the Lannister armies, but they had the advantage of unity, purpose, and dragons circling overhead. Their destination was the crossing into the Stormlands, near the Boneway or the Prince's Pass, both of which had been used historically by armies traveling between Dorne and the rest of Westeros. Scouts reported that the Lannisters had not yet moved against them, uncertain of where they would strike. Some Stormlords loyal to Aegon's cause had secured certain passes for safe passage. Daenerys felt her pulse quicken at the prospect of real battle. She had learned violence through necessity, but she did not relish it. Still, if she must lay the realm's false kings low, she would do so. They broke camp at dawn. Thousands marched or rode. The sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as they wound through canyons and dry riverbeds. Daenerys and Aegon conferred often, discussing strategy. She would deploy her Dothraki riders on the flanks, using their speed to harass enemy lines. The Golden Company's foot soldiers and elephants, once they arrived from the Stormlands, would form the backbone of their force. Dornish spearmen would hold the passes. Above it all, Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal would rain fire if the enemy stood against them. After weeks of marching, her body sore from the saddle, Daenerys gazed upon the rolling hills of the Stormlands. Dark clouds loomed overhead, thunder growling in the distance. It was a land of sudden rains and fierce winds, a sharp contrast to Dorne's scorched dryness. Scouts reported that a Lannister force might be gathering nearer to King's Landing, uncertain if the Targaryens would attempt a direct assault on the capital. For now, the passes were uncontested. They joined with the remainder of the Golden Company, forming a single grand host. From her vantage on a hill, Daenerys beheld the columns of men, horses, elephants, and baggage wagons stretching for miles. Aegon rode up beside her, a grin lighting his face. "We are strong," he said, as if in awe of the sight. "Let the Lannisters tremble." Daenerys's own heart soared. She recalled crossing the Red Waste with only a handful of survivors, her tiny dragons perched on her shoulders. Now, she stood at the head of an army the likes of which could reshape the Seven Kingdoms. She leaned forward in her saddle, stroking the neck of her silver mare. "If we keep discipline, if we keep faith in each other, we will not be denied." Aegon nodded, his eyes reflecting storms. "Together, Aunt," he said quietly. "No more Targaryen blood spilled by Targaryen hands. Let this be a new beginning for our house." She offered a firm nod in return. "A new beginning," she echoed, though deep inside, she wondered if fate would truly allow two Targaryens to share the spoils. For now, at least, they rode side by side, the Dragon Queen and the Dragon Prince, a united force that the realm had not seen since the days of old. That evening, they established a major camp along the fringes of the Stormlands. Dothraki scouts spread out to gather news of any local lords who might resist or join them. Word came that some minor strongholds had already bent the knee to Aegon's name, but others, loyal to the Baratheons or to King Tommen, might resist. Daenerys paced her pavilion, candlelight flickering over maps laid out on a crude table. The wind howled outside, rattling the tense fabric. She thought of the swirling storms that had marked her birth. Another storm was gathering now, one that would either crown her or destroy her. Yora entered with fresh intelligence from a scout. A Lannister host was rumored to be massing near the Rose Road, likely to block any advance on King's Landing. If the Targaryens wanted to push quickly, they might intercept that host near a town called Summerfield. Or they could circle around, lay siege to King's Landing directly, trusting the dragons to give them an edge. Aegon favored a bold strike at the Lannister host first, ensuring they had no chance to fall back on the capital. Daenerys was inclined to agree that if the Lannisters were in the field, it was better to face them head-on with dragons than to assault the formidable walls of King's Landing. Each hour of discussion ended with slightly different plans, as new reports trickled in. At dawn, the final decision was made. They would march north-northwest, aiming to force the Lannisters into open battle. If they won decisively, they could then advance on the capital unopposed. Prince Doran had sent a final message of support, pledging more Dornish spears if needed. The day they set forth, the sky was iron gray, rain spitting down in erratic gusts. A fitting omen for the Stormlands, Daenerys thought, pulling the hood of her cloak over her silver-gold hair. The Dothraki muttered about the cursed sky, longing for the dryness of their homeland, but they marched with stoic resolve. Every step brought them closer to a confrontation that could shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys felt the flutter of fear in her chest, but also exhilaration. She had come so far, from a lost girl with 3 dragon eggs to a leader of armies. She did not know if, at the end of this path, she would be queen alone or share the throne with Aegon. But she would not turn back. As the storm clouds cracked overhead, she urged her horse forward, leading the Khalasar in a thundering gallop that splashed mud and water in every direction. Beside her, Aegon spurred his mount, armor gleaming despite the overcast sky. 2 dragons of House Targaryen, riding at the head of a united army. It was more than she had ever dared to dream when she wandered the Red Waste, more than she had thought possible when she left Astapor without the Unsullied. Now, she carried only her own convictions, her loyal Dothraki, and her grown dragons to define her path. Let the realm tremble. A storm was coming, and Daenerys Stormborn would be at its heart.